Hey, what's up, comrades? We're here for season 4, episode 1, and this fucking thing starts off with a banger of an episode. So we get a lot of deep backstory on Duncan and his existence. Sorry, I don't have my headphones on. I was running around doing stupid bullshit, but I just watched this shit. I gotta talk about it right now. So Duncan is at so we start off and there's some guys trying to grave rob in Scotland. And this guy in a creepy robe shows up and kills one and then drags the other one off. And there's a raven, dark. So we get the credits, and then Duncan is at an art gallery, or no, he's at an auction house. That's what he is. And he's messing around with some guy, and they're betting on some piece of art. And then he sees a bracelet, and he's willing to pay 100,000 francs. But again, he's a billionaire, so who cares? To get this thing, and it's why is he so dead set on it? And then he has a flashback. So we see him with his father at the very beginning, even before he's an immortal, and he sees this redheaded girl who kind of looks like the brave chick, right? If you're looking for a point of contrast or a point of reference. Well, she's got a super nice rack, and she's washing her breasts in the river. And so he has to go talk to her. And we find out that they're in love and they want to get married, but that someone else in the clan is sworn to her because it makes the clan stronger somehow, or some bullshit or whatever. And then she's super distraught about it, and Duncan's distraught about it, but it is what it is. And then we get a later shot of he ends up giving her a bracelet so that she can always think of him when they're together, because he's gonna leave the clan because he can't stand the fact that she's getting married, and then he's gonna go wander and do some other bullshit or whatnot. And then we get another flashback later on where the guy that she's supposed to marry is about to beat the shit out of her because she has this bracelet, and calls him a whore, calls her a whore, and then Duncan stops him before he can hit her, and he's don't hit she's not even your wife yet, you dumbass. Once she's your wife, you can hit her, of course, but for now. And he's you made me a cuckold, and he's what are you fucking talking about? Treat your wife better, asshole. And then the guy challenges him to a fight, and Duncan's I'm not gonna fight my kinsman. And then his dad's you better fight your fucking kinsman. And then everyone else is you better fucking do it. And he's I don't want to. And his mom is don't do it. And he's and then the guy he gets a sword. I think it's his dad's sword. And then they start fighting, and Duncan gets cut up a little bit, and then he ends up killing the guy by kind of accident. It doesn't mean to kill him, but during the brawl, shit happens. And then he's super distraught about that. And then the next flashback that we get is about how he's banished from the clan or something, or he has to leave because he killed a kinsman and he feels terrible about it, and he's something redeeming, or he's supposed to take over and be the head of the clan, but he can't do it for various reasons. And so then she freaks out, throws the bracelet back at him, and then runs to this cliff that she used to just hang out as a little girl to get some private time away from everybody else in the Highlands. And so he chases after her and swears that he'll marry her after all and everything, and she gets super happy, and then wah wah wah, the cliff face falls, and she falls to her death. And then we find out that the church designated her as a suicide, and so she couldn't be married because of the Christian thing. And then so she couldn't be buried in holy ground, and so she had to be buried in an unmarked grave, essentially. So he went and buried her herself, and then buried the bracelet. And so when he saw the bracelet, he was freaking out because someone's been grave robbing around here, and he finds out that's kind of been the case. All right, so that's all those flashbacks that have to deal with that. Okay, so then, after he finds the bracelet, kind of back in the present, he flies out to Scotland, and he goes and sees his parents' grave on the side of a road, and he is talking to him, and then this chick shows up, and she's what are you doing here, Taurus? And he's I'm not a Taurus, I'm of Clan MacLeod, this is my ancestral land. And she's oh yeah, I'm Rachel MacLeod, I've never heard of you. And it's hot. Unfortunately, he doesn't fuck his niece, grandniece. Great grannies. But she tries to get some later on in the episode. She's hot too. Fuck. Anyway, she doesn't trust him at all, and is super mad, and it's grave robbing, and someone died, which is the guy from the beginning, and so super sketchy stuff about that. And then there's this Norwegian looking priest guy who's there, and he's sketchy as fuck because he's literally the guy from the beginning in the black cloak. But she doesn't know that. Everyone kind of trusts this guy. And so they go back and forth. It ends up Joe showed up too, and Duncan's the fuck you doing here? And Joe's the first time you returned to Scotland, I'm a watcher, and I watch you, and this is the first time you've returned to Scotland, which is the point I was making at the end of season 3 is he's what are you doing here in Paris? And it's bro, he's your watcher. Why the fuck you're here? Why the fuck would he not be here? And wasn't he here 2 episodes ago? Anyway, Crazy. So he's like, of course I'm here. So they hang out and play darts and shit. And then Duncan like rides around on his horse because he's looking for this grave. And finally Joe, like, who keeps following him around and harassing him about like, why is he here? What's he trying to do? Duncan finally reveals like the stuff I just talked about in the flashback. And then we also find out that around this point that and then the lady keeps bringing up, or there's people are talking about like this myth about, I can't remember the name of it. This guy like showed up and like raised the village, and then Duncan MacLeod came back from like the dead, or this guy, a Klansman named Duncan came back from the dead and like like killed him and like saved the village or whatever, and like all this stuff. And so this makes us like Rachel McLeod chick like very, very skeptical about the whole situation. Anyway, we do get a flashback of like Duncan talking about how he's telling Joe this later. At some point he finds the grave and he like reburies the bracelet, and then he like is writing out, and then the girl Rachel or whatever finds. It's Rachel or Rebecca? I think it's Rachel. Finds him, and his hands are dirty, and she's like, "He must be the grave robber." So she calls the police. The police come to his room, and they find his katana, and it's like, bro. But of course, he didn't do anything. And then finally, Rachel goes and finds like the grave, and they're digging it up to see what he stole or whatever. And then they find the bracelet that he was like, she had seen him earlier, and so then she feels really bad about the whole situation. And then the priest is like, "Oh, tell him I want to see him. That'd be fun," because he. At some point, he recognized. She says Duncan MacLeod, and he's like, "Oh, hold up, wait a minute." Right. And he's here looking for something. That's why he's using like the grave robbers or whatever, torturing them or some crazy nonsense. Anyway, so then Rachel goes and like apologizes and says they like the thing, and Duncan's like, it's fine, whatever. And he's like, hey, this priest wants to see you. And he's like, sure. And at some point he tells Joe the story about, we all the way back in season 1. Yeah, at some point in season 1, we learned that like he came back from the dead, and his dad was like, you're banished from the clan, like you monster or whatever. And so Duncan like leaves, and then he comes back like I think it was 2 years later after he got some training. No, he never got training. He just kind of wandered the land. This is before Connor found him and like trained him and taught about immortal. So he's just like wandering the land, doing whatever bullshit as like an immortal, not realizing he's an immortal. And he hears about the raising of the clan homestead, and so he heads back and meets with his mom, and his dad's like dead, and there's some Vikings that showed up because that was like a thing going on at the time. And so he gets super mad, and his mom's like gives him the sword that he should have inherited from his dad, and he's like, I can't take that, I've been banished. And his mom's like, take the fucking sword and get revenge for your dad. He's like, all right, I'll do it. So then he goes and he tracks down this group of guys, and they get like super scared because they think he came back from the dead. And then there's the Viking guy who's the priest, and he's like, they start fighting, and the guy's fighting with like a fucking axe like Odin gave him because he's like a crazy person. I think Odin is real. But and so they fight, and then Duncan like barely manages to like kill him, but Duncan doesn't know anything about being an immortal. Like he talks about the first time he ever sensed the presence and all this stuff. And so when he killed him, he just like stabbed him in the side, and the guy fell over, and then he stabbed him like in the heart, and he's like, and he left his sword just fucking sitting there because he's like, I did it. And then he took his axe, and he took the axe and like buried it with his father as like, fuck that guy and his magic axe, and like, my father's like got revenge because he's got the fucking sword and stuff. Like some awesome like pagan mythology stuff. It's fucking fantastic. Okay, so then Duncan goes to the church, and he's like recognizes the guy, and he's about to like beat the shit out of him. The guy's like, oh, you're gonna fight me on holy ground? And Duncan's like, what do you fucking want? And he's like, I want the axe. Go get the fucking axe, bring it back, and we can like go about our merry way. And so Duncan goes, and he's talking to Joe, and he's like, yeah, I know exactly where the axe is, and this is where we find out it's in his father's grave. And then he gets the axe, and then he takes the sword, like the family sword that's like his sword, that it's just like hanging in the tavern here. And then the girl is like super sorry and flirty with him and everything. Like she got like horny real fast. So then he goes, and then he finds the guy in like a cloak just like hanging out in like the woods, whatever fucking thing he's doing, like the crazy priest. And he like tosses him the axe, and he's like, all right, man, see you later. And Duncan's like, I don't fucking think so. And there's a point before where Joe's like, man, just give him the axe and get out of here. There's no reason for you guys to fight. And he's like, no, I have to fight this motherfucker. He killed my dad. I have to get revenge. Like, he's still alive. Like, fuck that guy. And I agree 100%. So then he like set up a trap. So like this guy's like in a little like, I don't know, this little clearing in like the woods. And then Duncan like hits something, and the whole thing like lights up in like a flaming circle. And the guy's like, oh yeah, fuck you. And so then like the power of Odin compels me to like fucking kill you. And so then they start fighting in this rain of this like fire circle, and then it's badass as hell. And Duncan's doing a good job considering he's been fighting with katana for like 300 years. But he gets injured, but at the same time he's able to like cut this guy's head off, and then he looks like the most peaceful he's ever been, getting the quickening, and he's just like got the sword stuck in him, and he's like, yeah, hell yeah, fuck this guy. And then my assumption is he puts the axe back in, and then we see him like returning the sword like early in the morning. And the lady comes out and she's like wearing just like a bra and like half a nightgown or whatever. And so she goes up to him and like gives him a kiss on the cheek. And he's like, all right, well, I'll catch you later. And he goes. And then Joe is like, you don't want to stick around and hang out a little bit more? And he's like, nah, man, let legends be legends. There's no reason for me to be here. And then we see like, and then we keep getting this like fucking awesome like Scottish music, like Celtic Women kind of style stuff. Anyway. It's like something like that. I've heard it like 1,000 times, like on the Celtic Circle, which was one of my favorite albums. It's like a 2-part thing that just had all these like kind of like vaguely like Celtic sounding songs. Anyway, and so then we see him just like using his katana and practicing by like the old castle, the old McLeod castle and whatnot, and chilling and being awesome in this fucking banger, fucking great episode.
Episode 2's got another banger, not gonna lie. It's fucking good. So, God, where do we even start with this? So we start off, Duncan and Joe have returned to Gotham City, and as they're getting ready to like take off, we see this like sniper assassin kind of tracking Duncan and Joe. Then all of a sudden, we see this other guy, and McLeod feels like the immortal presence, and then this other guy gets like shot up real bad. So Duncan chases after he sees the assassin. And he chases after him and tells Joe to grab the dude and throw him in the van and drive off. So they drive off, and then Duncan chases down the guy, the masked assassin, and it ends up being Charlie. Charlie's back from the Baltics. Holy shit. Right? Why'd he kill this fucking dude? Also, that dude is an immortal. Also, that dude whose name is Cord, he served in Vietnam with fucking Joe Dawson. So Joe is driving this guy, and then he starts singing like some fucking Marine Corps cadence. And the guy's like, the fuck? And he's like, you don't remember me? And he's like, Boy Scout. And he's like, man, I haven't even called me Boy Scout since the 70s. And so then we get a flashback of Joe and this guy, like in some Viet Cong camp, doing whatever bullshit they're doing. And then Cade clearly has like some, dark shit, because he's in there trying to negotiate with some woman to like not tell the Viet Cong that the Marines are around here or whatever. And she like refuses. And so he sends like Joe on his way and then kills her. And then Joe's like, oh, we can't be doing that, man. That's like fucked up, like something. And then the camp gets attacked by the Viet Cong, and then everyone gets kind of like killed. Joe steps on a landmine, and that's how he loses his leg, which is why he's got like a peg leg or whatever. I thought he was just like a gimp, but apparently he has like no leg, because he ends up in the military hospital later, and he's like, oh, my leg hurts, and the doctor's like, well, you don't have a leg, so it's phantom pain. And he's like, fuck. And so then Joe tries to kill himself. He's about to shoot his fucking brains out, and he talks about Cord, and how Cord dragged him like 16 miles back to the hospital and all that, and everyone's like, no, there's no Cord. Cord's dead. Like, they found his like dog tags and whatnot. He's like, no, he can't be dead. And so they want him to see a psychologist, and he's like, fuck psychology, which is fair. And then and then the Watchers come, and they're like, hey man, yeah, you're right, the guy did die, but he's an immortal and you should join our team. So like Joe doesn't only just owe he owes his life to this Cord guy, immortal guy, but he also owes like his life, like his whole existence as like a Watcher and the whole organization. And like, he was like a kid, and now he's like an old man and all this stuff. And so there's some like crazy stuff going on there. And then meanwhile, Duncan's talking to Charlie about like what the fuck's going on, and we find out that this Cord guy was like over in the Baltics, and that he sold so there's the chick that like Charlie followed out there to like get his dick wet with, but also like fight in like whatever crazy like civil war they're fighting over there still, apparently, even though I thought there was like a peace treaty, but I guess not. And they sent a team out, and the team got like fucked because all the weapons were like bullshit weapons that didn't actually work or didn't have like ammo or something. And I don't know, they didn't check or practice with the weapons first. That's really on them as far as I'm concerned. Cord did like like, do your fucking due diligence, freedom fighters, the fuck. Anyway, and so, Charlie goes to like fuck over Cord because he fucked them over, and then Cord shows up to the woman, and the woman pulls a gun on him, and he like giggles to himself. He's like, I sold you that weapon, you dumb bitch. And so he kills her, and then Charlie gets back, and then Cord's like, suck it, bitch, and like shoots at him or like knocks him out or whatever. And so that's why the whole assassin thing came. And so Duncan wants to talk to Cord and just like hash some things out, but then so Joe goes and sets up like a meeting, and then Duncan and him are about to meet, and then Charlie shows up, and so that throws the whole thing out the fucking window. And then Cord's super pissed off at Joe, and Duncan's like, don't kill him, he saved my life, blah, 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 blah. And then at some point, Cord just like fucking shows up and is like, I'm here to fight you, Duncan MacLeod. And Duncan fights him and then beats him. And then instead of cutting his head off, he's like, you and Joe are even now. That's the only reason I didn't cut your head off is because of him, which was a bad call from Duncan's point of view, as we'll shortly see. Because, so you think everything's good to go. Joe invites Charlie over for a drink at his bar to like kind of explain things and like why like him and Cord are friends because he like saved his life. He doesn't like say it directly, but he kind of like hints around it. It's very good writing. About how like, you know, bands of brothers and how like once you're, you know, you've been in a situation, because like you got to remember Charlie's like a ex SEAL and he's like serving the Balkans, and like when you fight and die with these people, like they become like your brothers for life, which is true. From personal experience. So that's great writing all around. But so then Charlie walks out and there's Cord, and then they go having like a knife fight, and of course Cord beats the shit out of Charlie because he's like an immortal who's been fighting for like like I don't even know, hundreds of years. And he stabs Charlie and then pushes him off like this ledge, and he falls. And then MacLeod shows up and he senses Cord. It shows up at Joe's diner or bar, and he senses Cord, and so he runs out. And instead of Cord, he finds Charlie, and then he finally, as Charlie's like dying in his arms, like holy shit, man, like this fucking season, Charlie's dying in his arms. He finally tells him that he's an immortal, and we get some flashbacks, and Charlie's like putting everything together, like how he literally saw Duncan take like a shot to the chest and was fine, and how Duncan kept being like, I can't tell you things, yada yada, and he's like, Cord's an immortal and I'm an immortal, and Charlie's like, holy shit, I never had a chance to kill this guy, and he's like, yeah, motherfucker, I kept telling you to stay the fuck away from this dude, and you wouldn't listen. And then Charlie dies, and Duncan's super mad, so he charges back into Joe, and he's like, tell me where this motherfucker is right now. And Cord, he has like a paintball shop or whatever where he just like picks on people because he's an expert marksman, which is funny because I have a friend, and when we were like in high school, we would like invite lower classmen out into like the mountains in the winter, and then we would like hunt them down with paintballs. But I know, psychopathic behavior, but whatever, it's fun times. So it's very similar. So then Duncan goes over there, and the guy's like, haha, you're in my turf now, and he like disappears into like his shop, and then he gets like a dagger or something and tosses it, and it just cuts like Duncan's face a little bit, and then they sword fight, and this time Duncan kills the shit out of him, and then Duncan's like super distraught, so he's like looking at a picture of him and Charlie back in his dojo that he bases his operations out of still. And Joe shows up, and they like talk for a little bit, and Duncan's like, we can't be friends anymore, like I'm an immortal, we're in different worlds, like this is causing problems, yada yada yada. And I'm like, bro, you have like you have mortal friends like all the fucking time, the fuck are you talking about? Whatever. So anyway, so then they separate. What? And that's in the episode. Like shit, man. First 2 episodes in, it's like a lot of stuff going on. Like they're really, and there's 2 more seasons to go. It almost feels like this is the final season. They're trying to wrap up everything, but like nope, we got 20 more episodes and then this season, and then another 2 seasons, like another 30 episodes. Because the last 2 seasons are a little short, and then a movie or 2 before we go back to like Highlander 2. This fucking season, man. So episode 3, we start off with Alan, who's an immortal working at, he has like this, I don't even know, it's like a garage. He's working on like a car or something, or an engine block or something, but it's like outdoor, it's almost like a junkyard. And then he feels like the presence of an immortal, and then we see Mickey. Who's Mickey? Mickey is an autistic immortal adult man. The fuck? Yeah, he's like, but he's like actually autistic, not like neurodivergent like people like to pretend their kids are, just because their kids are, I don't know, slightly more introverted or whatever. But so he's got like a train obsession, right, which is like a key point of autism. And so they're chit-chatting, and then they both feel like another presence, and then Alan's like girlfriend comes out and takes Mickey to hide in like a bus, and then this douchebag named Tucker shows up, and him and Alan fight, and we focus a lot on Mickey because the girl is like freaking out because Alan gets his head cut off, and then Mickey like kills her by accident, right, because he's trying to keep her quiet because Alan told them to be quiet, so he's trying to do what he was told because he's autistic. Sad. And then while the Tucker guy is like absorbing all the quickening and whatnot, Mickey like runs off. And eventually runs into Richie. Richie's riding his bike around, and then Richie's getting ready for a fight because he senses an immortal, but he sees this guy and he's like, holy shit. So he talks to him for a little bit, and then he grabs him up and takes him back to MacLeod. Meanwhile, Tucker's like watching from a distance. So over at MacLeod's place, he's in a conversation to like buy some shit house for a lot of money so that he can like spend time fixing it up. And So he gets that. Richie comes in. He's like, "What do you think of this?" And he's like, "Looks like a piece of shit." And Duncan's like, "I know, excellent, right?" Anyway, Mickey gets introduced, and then Duncan's like, "Ooh, boy, what are we gonna do with this guy?" And so Richie's like, "I don't know, I'm gonna try to figure it out. I gotta help him. That's what you taught me." And then we get the flashback. So the flashback involves Duncan like riding around in like the Old West in like the 1840s or something, and then he comes across this guy like whipping an Indian. We know that he's not Cheyenne because that gets brought up at some point, but no idea what actual tribe he's from. So he beats the guy up, shoos him away. He takes him to like a town. Everyone's like super racismo. So then he takes him to a doctor, and he convinces the doctor to do his fucking job and like stop being such a racist and to treat the Indian guy. And then at some point, like Duncan's just standing outside with like a shotgun, and all these people are giving him side eyes. And there's like this guy in a black cloak who's clearly the bad guy because he's wearing black. And then eventually the sheriff comes up and is like, "The fuck's going on here?" And then the Indian guy, while the doctor after he treated his back, he's like cleaning some of his materials. He like sneaks out of the back and runs. And then the sheriff is just kind of like, "All right, but you need to chill the fuck out." And then he heard a gunshot, because what happened was the Indian guy like ran, and then like his slave owner came along and saw him, and he like grabbed him, and then they got into a tussle, and then the Indian like shot him, right? And then so everyone runs over and sees him holding a gun and this dead guy, and everyone's like, "Hoo boy, we were right, Duncan's wrong, that dumbass." And then he's like, the sheriff's like, "We got to figure this out," and he's got to go to trial and figure out what's going on and all this stuff. Because I think like slavery was verboten out in the territories, right? So then Duncan makes like a point of that. But the Indian guy, he's like, "Don't run, man. Just put your gun down and go." And the guy starts to run, and then another dude shoots him, the guy in the black, obviously. And then Duncan runs over and punches him in the face. And that's the end of the flashbacks. All right, so back to the present. So Mickey is like very... he's hard to deal with, right? He keeps breaking things or like wandering off, and eventually gets hit by a police car while he's in the street, and then they arrest him after they hit him. Like, the fuck? And so then Richie and Duncan go back and forth about what to do with him, and Richie's like, "I think I found a place." And eventually they go in there. He's like catatonic, essentially, just rocking back and forth saying train facts. And Richie gives him like a train cap, and they bring him back. And then he found a place that like helps autistic adults. And it's also like at an old convent or something, so it's like holy ground. So it's like perfect. So like, "Hey, we're gonna take you to this place, and they're gonna help you," and yada yada. And he doesn't want to go, but then they convince him to go by talking about how it's like they're gonna go to like a switch track first. Oh, at some point Tucker like shows up to Duncan's place. Duncan goes out and starts fighting him, but and Richie's gone checking stuff out, and then Mickey like comes out and like grabs Duncan because he's autistic and he doesn't know what's going on. And so Duncan like stabs Tucker and then has to chase Mickey, and that's when he goes to jail. Okay. So then they're at the tray yard, and things are going great. He's playing like Hallelujah from like Mendel's Messiah or whatever. Handel's Messiah. I don't know why I said Mendel. It's like so funny. And then and then Tucker shows up. So Duncan and him go off to fight, and Richie and Mickey are just kind of hanging out looking at trains. And then some douchebag policemen show up, and they're like, "That's the guy who killed the people back in like Greensboro, North Carolina or whatever." I think they were down in North Carolina. Anyway, and so then they come over to like arrest him, and then Mickey kind of freaks out, and like they're yelling at him, and he doesn't like being yelled at. So then he kills like one of the policemen and like knocks the other one through like a window or something, and then runs off. And Richie grabs him, and they go like hide. So Duncan ends up killing Tucker, kind of off screen, to be completely honest. We see like pieces of the fight, but it's like the important part about this episode is Mickey, which is like a bold move, and I thought was awesome. So then Duncan comes back, sees the dead policeman, meets up with Richie, and they have like a heart-to-heart about like, "Hey, Mickey can't be alive anymore. Like, this is getting ridiculous. Like, he's immortal. He's like someone's gonna kill him eventually. We might as well just like do it now." And so he's like, "I'll take care of it." And then Richie's like, "No, it's my problem. I'll take care of it." And so then he takes Mickey down into like the cave where the trains come out, like the tunnel. And then Richie pulls a sword out. He's like, "Hey, man, I'm sorry. I wish I could do more for you." And then Mickey like freaks out and runs a little bit. And Richie's like, "Mickey, come on, man, this is how it's got to be." And then Mickey's like, "You're right, but I don't want you to do it." So then he puts his head on like the train track, and then the train comes and beheads him. And then Richie gets the quickening. And then we get like, it's like super sad, and Duncan's sad, and Richie's sad. But then like later on, Duncan's at his house with his shirt off, of course, for the ladies, or Adrian Peterson, should I say? Or yeah, Paul. It's not Peterson. It's Adrian Paulson, I think. So he's working on the house, and then Richie comes up and offers to work on the house, and then they work on the house, and they hear a train, and then we get like more of Handel's Messiah. It's kind of weird. So this episode's pretty good. It's got episode 4. it's got a couple things going on for it. So we have kind of two pathways. We have the pathway of Marcus and Duncan. Marcus is an old nemesis, immortal nemesis of Duncan's, who uses dogs to hunt down other immortals, so he doesn't actually have to fight them, which is kind of genius. But these like Rottweilers, I think is what they're called. I'm not like a big dog guy. I mean, I like Asian dogs, but like angry German dogs, like I'm good. I don't know if Rottweilers are even German. Anyway, nonetheless. And that's how the episode starts. He starts off, there's an immortal running away and they gets eaten up by a bunch of dogs, and the guy just like rolls out of the woods and cuts his head off. The other aspect of the story deals with not only so the guy who like shot Tessa and Richie, he like pops up out of nowhere, and the Richie chases him down and beats him up real good. And then they both go to jail. They both get released because there's no evidence that this guy shot anybody, right? And then Duncan and Richie like both have like some words about the situation, but then Duncan's like, it's not gonna bring Tessa back. I'm not gonna deal with it. And then Richie's like having a harder time, so Richie ends up tracking him down again. And like at some point, Duncan goes to get like his revenge because he's a warrior. But then he sees the guy's like fiance is like super pregnant and that they're like poor and stuff, and the guy's like, so then he's like, it's not worth making this kid like an orphan to get like my revenge, which is a interesting choice, I gotta say. But it's not like the bad choice, right? It's like one of those things where you can perpetuate like death and destruction and all that, or you can just like move on with your day. Like, if it's just the guy by himself, then it's like, heads roll, but Anyway, this woman is like super annoying because she's like, no, he's innocent. There's no way he could do anything. And Richie and Duncan are both like, oh my gosh, this dumb bent. Anyway, so eventually Richie tracks him down again after he supposedly moves out and runs away. And then he catches him at work and he beats him up and chases him up like one of those like ladders they have in like Gotham City in New York. And there's about to like throw him off like the fire escape. Yeah, I think it's a fire escape ladder. When he has like a change of heart at the last second and then doesn't. And then his whole story mostly deals with like not repentance, but forgiveness, and like, is it really worth it, and like what it means to like kill somebody and stuff. It sounds pretty good. Meanwhile, and then Duncan's arc is all about how this guy was a total dirtbag. Back in the past, Duncan was like banging some lady, some like duchess or something. It seems she's got like the crazy hair. And when I say crazy hair, I don't mean like it's like the crazy wig hair, like from Marie Antoinette's era, right? And then this guy is like, he's like a wild man or something. And then Duncan like helped him stop being a wild man, apparently, or something. They had some sort of like friendly relationship, it seems. But then the guy was like using his dogs to like kill guards or something. And like this woman that he was like banging like really didn't like that situation, and so Duncan helped like get him arrested and the dogs killed. And so then when they hang the guy, Duncan's like, I'm gonna take care of the body, and the lady's like, no, you're gonna come with me and be my what is it called, gigolo. And Duncan, again, this is another one of those situations that has come up. It doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen, and it's like it's bound to happen where Duncan clearly should have just killed this guy. He should have gone back to the grave, dug him up, and like cut his head off and been done with the matter. But he doesn't, and then it comes back to like hunt him later, obviously. And we see Duncan, like the guy keeps like approaching him on like sacred ground, or he'll have like one of his Rottweilers like playing with a kid in a park, and he's like, "You go to kill me with that kid. That kid is dead." He's doing like really sneaky stuff like that, and he's just kind of hunting him down. And at some point, Duncan's like going for a jog or something, and the dogs like get him and bite him up real good, and he like barely escapes in his car. Things kind of turn around for Duncan on the and then so the two storylines kind of merge more. They don't merge, but like Richie gets more involved in his storyline in that he kind of he intercedes between Joe and Duncan, because Duncan's trying to track this guy down so he can finally kill him. But then he doesn't want to talk to Joe, and Joe doesn't want to talk to him because of like their little like spat in the previous episode where it's like, I'm an immortal and you're a watcher, we can't be friends anymore, and like Charlie dying and stuff. Speaking of forgiveness. And so Richie is trying to figure out what's going on with that, but no one will like tell him. But eventually, no one tells him. There's a lot of like kind of like in series flashbacks, as in like he remembers like when Tessa died, and it plays like the "Who Wants to Live Forever" song and all that. And then there's some flashbacks to just like the previous episode, in case you like missed that in syndication, about how like Charlie died because Duncan was trying to do Joe a favor, and they can't be friends because they have dual loyalties or something. And I'm like, that's nothing to do with him being a watcher, to be completely fair. He just like was like, no, this guy saved my life. If you would do me a favor as a friend, as like a regular friend, not like as the Watcher friend. Anyway, because Joe knows where like this Marcus guy is, obviously, because of the Watcher Network, so he could help Duncan out. But then they're like, no, and Richie's like, I don't understand. Anyway, so then Duncan finally tracks this guy, or finds this. Oh, so when the guy's like threatening the kid, Duncan has like tracked him down to like this dog breeding place, and at the dog breeders, there's like this quote unquote bitch in heat, right? Which is which is like literally bitch means a female dog, which is why it's derogatory slang towards women in general, because you're calling them a dog. So and so he wants to like, Duncan at some point killed one of his dogs, like ran him over or something, or like injured him. So then the guy had to like set him on fire and give him like a Viking funeral or something. So he wants this dog, but then Duncan interferes him from like killing this like breeder and stealing the dog essentially. And then Duncan and this lady like have a conversation, and she makes some like dick reference, which is pretty funny. And then he's like, what's with this? And she's like, this is the dog he wanted. And he's like, oh, she's cute. And so he like adopts her somewhat because she's in heat, and he knows that he can use that to against like this guy and the dog, and that comes useful because Duncan's back at his like manor, like fixing it up, and then like the guy shows up and Duncan like grabs the sword, and then like a dog walks through the door too, and then a dog like jumps through the freaking window. And Duncan like takes a step back, and the guy's like, ha ha ha, and then he opens the door, and there's like Lucille, who's like the name of the bitch in heat, and the two dogs are like, well, we'll be back later, and they both go into like the room to like bang her out. And so the Duncan just like shuts the door. And so then they get a fight. And so they fight, and then Duncan finishes this guy off with the most ridiculous thing I think I've seen in this entire episode, where like immortals are fighting with swords, kind of each other's heads. He does like a flip over the guy, and he just kind of like watches him flip over him, and then as part of like the flip, he does like an attack and cuts the guy's head off, and that seals the deal. I was like, that was absurd. It was very slow, but it was like very silly looking. Like it was cool because like the Adrian Peterson guy obviously like, did the flip, but it was just like that. Like it's kind of silly. Anyway, and then the episode wraps up with Richie and him talking about how Marcus is dead, and like still not. Duncan doesn't want to talk about him and Joe, and then Richie is like, they kind of talk about how he couldn't kill. I think his name's David or whatever the guy's name is. Anyway, but pretty good episode. Episode 5's another banger. That's 5 in a row. This fucking season's amazing. This one's more of like a comedy sketch than anything else, which is so good. And the reason I say that is, so we start with a guy, he's gambling, he's playing Mahjong and talking up real fast. He's like this stereotypical kind of like, not gangster, gambler guy. And then he beats these guys at Mahjong, and then this guy comes over and is like, yo, what's money? And he like takes off and falls down a chute, and then it's like this other guy thinks he's dead, so he wraps him up, and then when the gangsters come by to like, where's the white guy, he just like points outside, and then after they're gone, the gambling guy, I didn't catch his name, he gets up and he's like, thanks for the money. So then he heads out, and then Duncan's at his like chateau working on stuff, and the guy rolls up, and they're old friends, and this dude's got like a fancy cane, and then we get a background story on him. He used to own this casino called the Double Eagle, and it was pretty well off. Duncan's over there like winning, and some guy tries to cheat him, and this guy beats the shit out of him and like throws him out the door. And then guess who shows up? Dun dun dun, Amanda. And unlike most episodes, we're gonna kind of pause it there and come back to the present. So this Duncan and this guy, he wants to go to lunch and catch up, but the guy's got like a deal he's got to go work on, which he's trying to buy a horse to go like horse racing, like Uma Musami. This is essentially the Uma Musami Highlander episode. And so he goes off to that, and then Duncan's like, cool, I'll meet you for dinner. And so later on, Duncan goes to the dojo because that's where he's still living while he builds up his house. And guess who's there? Dun da da, Amanda, and she's moving in. She's got like her suitcases and stuff. And then she, they like fuck around like literally. And then she's making him like dinner, and he's like, oh look, yeah, it looks good. You're making me dinner, shit. Okay, I gotta go take care of something real quick. I'll be right back. And so he goes downstairs to meet up with this guy, and he's like, oh yeah, no one's upstairs. Don't worry about it. Let's have breakfast tomorrow. How about you get the fuck out of here? And then they like chit chat for a little bit, and then he's like, fucking Amanda, and Duncan's like, ooh, because he knows Duncan at some point says, don't go upstairs, I got a girl upstairs, she's very shy. The guy's like, I want to meet her, and he's like, no, please. And then we go to the past, and we find out that Amanda showed up at this casino pretending to be like a dumb French chick, and then like won the casino during like a gambling session from this guy, and then he was super distraught about it. And so back to the present, this is why Duncan's trying to keep them apart. And so then we have a lot of the rest of the episode is just shenanigans with Richie showing up, or Duncan, because everyone's got the quickenings, or everyone's got the what do they call it? The thing where they recognize other immortals. And so it keeps being like, they're like, Duncan keeps freaking out because he's like, uh-oh. And then Amanda's like, who's coming over here? And he's like, it's Richie. And she's like, oh, I haven't seen Richie in a while. And he's like, And then it is Richie. And it's like hilarity ensues. So the Richie gets pulled into it. Richie's got to distract Amanda, but he can't do it because he's like 18, even though he's like an immortal. And she's like super hot and flirting with him. And so he like reveals that Duncan went to the racetrack because that's where he's going to meet gambling guy. And then over at the racetrack, the gambling guy wants to buy a horse, but then the guy who was going to sell him the horse, like called Double Eagle, right? Fun. Ends up like doubling the price or something, and he doesn't got it, so he wants McLeod to invest in it. And then they feel, and he's like, oh, that must be my buddy Richie. And so he runs off, and it is Richie. And it's like, shit. And then Richie like ends up buying the horse with the guy, and then Duncan gives like his half of the horse proceedings to like Amanda, as like, I don't know why. It's just because she's a hot babe, and like she's like, yay, and he's like, shit. I think it's because he like snuck off and was pretending to go to school because he's like a college professor now. That happened in like the last episode. And so then she thinks that he came over here to buy her the horse as like a gift, and that's why he was being sneaky about it. And he's like, yes, because she thinks he's having sex with another woman, and she's like, I want to meet this woman. And he's like, oh, meet her right here. She's got 4 legs and then blah blah blah. And she's like, oh, tee-hee, my horse. And he's like, yeah. So he transfers like the ownership. So now the gambling guy and Amanda share the horse, and then we find out it's not just the guy hates Amanda hates him, because after Amanda took over the gambling den like back in the day, she transformed it into like the Queen of Spades, like her own thing, and she was finally like, I feel so good, this is the best I've ever had, like I've been enjoying life, I'm like the queen of my world. And like Duncan's going down on her, and they're like loving life and having a great time, and then dun the place gets set on fire, and then she thinks it's this guy, so she like loses her fucking mind. It's like, I'm gonna kill that motherfucker, blah 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 blah. And so in the modern day, he's like, so and so, and she's like, if I find that guy, I'm gonna kill that motherfucker. It's like, you haven't gotten over it? And she's like, I will never get over it. It's Jesus. So that's fun. So then he continues to try to keep them apart, and then at some point they all end up in the same place, and then they're like, we're gonna go fight, and Duncan's like, don't fight here. And then he's like, no, we're gonna fight in your house, fuck you. And then right before they're a fight, he's like, all right, well, if you guys kill each other, who's gonna take the prize for the horse? And like, what are you talking about? It's like, you co-own the horse. And they're like, fuck. All right, we're gonna go to the horse race tomorrow, see if she wins, and then we're gonna kill each other. And they're like, deal. So the next day they both go to the horse race, and they're watching, and the horse wins, and they're like, yay, and they're cheering and everything. And then afterwards, at some point, Gambling Man talks about how like his luck's been super bad, because there's something about like he started with a lucky coin, and that's how he like built his industry, kind of like a Scrooge McDuck situation. But that when he lost the casino, he came back to get the coin, and Amanda's like, fuck you, you can't have it, because he called her like a cheat, and she's like, I'm no cheat, fuck you. And then after that place burned down because she blamed him, she took the lucky coin and like threw it down the sewer, right? And so so they're about to start fighting, and then meanwhile Duncan's like trying to figure out some information, and he comes running up. He's like, wait, read this first, Amanda, before you guys fight. And she reads it, and she finds out that this guy was on this ship that's sunk in the ocean that the guy had told like the story about earlier, when he was talking about like all the bad luck he's had. And so he couldn't have possibly set fire to the casino because he was like at the bottom of the ocean. And so she's like, oh, okay, fine. So then they try to decide who's going to take over the horse, because they still don't want to work with each other, because they still don't like each other. And so Duncan's like, look, you both love gambling, let's do this. He puts down a deck of cards. He's like, whoever draws the highest wins the horse. And so the guy pulls like a jack, and then Amanda pulls a card and is like, oh, I guess you win, and like sets the card down. And the guy's like, hooray, yay, I hope I never see you again, you dumb bitch. And then, see you later, Duncan. And he's like, yeah, see you later. And then she's like, you're going to be so mad. And she flips over the coin, and it's a fucking Queen of Spades. So she actually won, but because she felt bad for suspecting this guy for all this time, and because she loves Duncan and he's like their friends, she's like, this is like a quality woman, everybody. This cheating bitch who keeps cutting her hair way too fucking short is a quality woman, because she does this for a man. She sacrifices her own happiness because it makes him happy, which makes her more happy, which is like lesson to all you young bros out there. Be like, find someone like Amanda, not someone like, I don't know, most of these women out there. Anyway, and so then they fuck, and that wraps up that episode. Fucking awesome. All right, cool. So for this next episode, we get a couple interesting things. So first we have it's like episode 6. We get a previously on Highlander, which I don't know if we've ever had that before. I'm trying to think. I feel like it might have happened like once. There's always like it's not like I'm saying previously. It's like Joe Dawson is like previously on Highlander, right? Which is like an old 80s 90s thing on TV. It might have been into the 2000s. I'm not exactly sure, but It's like, hey, it's been a while. Do you remember this? If you don't, here's like a quick flashback. In some of the 2-part episodes and stuff, they would have like in the introduction, they'd give you like a little bit of like brief, but I don't think they ever like announced it as like, hey, pay attention. And then I almost feel like it's completely unnecessary because. I mean, I guess if you're watching this, that's the idea, right? Like, they're assuming you're just like tuning in on occasion to this show. You're not like watching this. You're not like binge watching it. Essentially, is like what I'm doing. We are watching like 1 to 3 episodes a day over the course of like a couple of weeks. And so like, oh yeah, Kenneth, I remember that guy. So who's Kenneth? Or Kenny? Kenny was a little kid immortal who was like very sneakopotamus and tried to like, he was like a total asshole, and he's like 800 something years old or whatever. And so this episode has Kenny come back, and he's being chased by like old pirate man. Well, not even a pirate, like old sea captain guy. And then we get the return of Anne, right, who's now more pregnant, and she looks hotter, which is a thing for most pregnant women. It's because the way God designed women is that you have to be attracted to them as a man so that you'll procreate, and then you have to protect the baby, right? And so the women become like more attractive. Like bigger boobs and everything, and so you're like more likely to be inclined, and their faces get a little rounder, which is like more adorable, which triggers like your man brain to protect. And then everything about babies, the way they're designed, is to like have parents like want to protect them and be very conscientious of like their existence, which is like all the way they cry, the way they look, everything like that is to instill like a deep-seated like protect kind of thing, so that the human species didn't die off or whatever, because we tend to be kind of selfish. And there's also the whole devil thing. Anyway, enough mysticism for those of you who don't believe. But here's the deal. So Kenny is coming back. So we're like hard into like the Amanda arc. I know I haven't announced it. We had like kind of like a transitionary arc at the beginning. I was just so impressed by how like fucking awesome the first couple episodes were. But there was like not much going on there. It was like the house arc, I guess. I don't know what this whole thing is. But then Amanda like officially like moved in, right? Now she's like always around. Starting in the last episode. And she sticks around for a while. She's a very popular character. She's very sexy and sensual, and it's nice having some like femme fatale energy in this show. It like spices it up. So 4 seasons in, the show has really like kind of figured it out. Essentially, like there's like transitions every like half a season or whatnot. So we'll see. If I remember correctly, Amanda's around for a while, but I could just be recalling like episodes that she was in. It's been like 30 years since I watched this fucking show. Anyway, and so we start off, and Ken is fleeing from some rugged-looking gentleman, and he heads into the hospital. Anne's there, and then she grabs him and like is trying to help him, and he's like, it's like the hospital's like it's like St. Holy Cross or whatever, so it's holy ground technically. And so then Anne has one of her like nurses or assistants or whatever like call Duncan and tell him that his nephew's here. And so then Duncan shows up, and he's like, "Hey, what's up? It's been a while. You're looking good." And she's like, "Thanks, big guy." And then he sees Kenny, and she's like, he needs some help. And Duncan's like, of course he does. This fucking asshole tried to like sneak up and cut my head off. And he's like, the only help I'm going to give you is helping you get safely to the airport, and then you're fucking on your own. And they go back and forth a little bit. But then Duncan runs into Sea Captain, and he's literally a sea captain. So back in like, I don't know, sometime. I'm like not always watching very closely when the dates like pan across the screen, but it seems like it was like late early 1900s. No, it seems like more 1800s. It's like kind of like that privateer kind of era. And anyway, Duncan and a bunch of guys are like walking along a beach, and then one of these Duncan's like homies starts arguing with the captain about like, we need water. There's no, like, they found like a puddle of water, and they're like, we need water and supplies. We got to go back to China. And the guy's like, no one will make me a liar. This cargo is going to make it to England on time. And then there's like, and then the kid's going to like shoot this guy because he's starting to mutiny or whatever. And so then he does, even though Duncan's like, no, he'll be fine. Don't worry about it. And he's like, all right, I trust you. And they both know they're immortals, so it's kind of like they're just like playing a role, essentially. And so he shoots the guy, and Duncan gets super mad. And the guy's like, whatever, I'll lose a couple men to make like 100,000 pounds. And I'm like, damn, that's a lot of fucking money. Like back in like 1830 or whatever. Like that guy would be like a billionaire. I can see why he's so upset. And then the rest of the crew like ends up mutinying, and Duncan goes. They want to like shoot him and cut off his head, and so Duncan just is like, no, let's just leave him here to like starve to death. And everyone's like, yeah, that's a good idea. And he's like, you owe me. And the guy's like, fuck you. Anyway, so that's like not super important. Like the big thing is we learn that, okay, so I had mentioned, if you'd follow my stuff, like in season 2 or something, the background of like Amanda meeting Duncan, and it seemed to me the way I was watching the show that just from like period dress and stuff. Again, I actually miss I miss the dates a lot. But I thought at the time that Amanda was not that old because it seemed like she had just become an immortal, and then I think if I remember correctly, her name was Rachel. Taught her how to be an immortal, and then they like shortly thereafter meet Duncan MacLeod, so like she's just barely older than Duncan. But no, she is like 1,200 years old. Like she's a lot older than Duncan MacLeod, like a lot. And so we find out, so Kenny ends up coming back to stay with Duncan for like a night before he like ships him off. And as soon as he walks in, he like warns Amanda about this, and then she's like, "What's this?" And she's like, "Oh, it's Richie." It's like the opposite of the other episode where she's like, "Oh, I feel someone else. Is Richie coming to hang out? That's fun." And then Kenny shows up, and then Duncan's like, "This guy's gonna stay with us for a night, but watch him." And she's like, "Kenneth," and he's like, "Amanda," and they like hug, and Duncan's like, "What the fuck?" And so then we find out in like a secondary like flashback series that Amanda, like that Kenny in like 800 BC or whatever, or 80, was like, his family was like attacked by like Norman raiders or something, like the Vikings essentially, and his family was killed. And then he woke up, and then Amanda was doing whatever bullshit she was doing, and she'd been around for a couple hundred years, and she senses an immortal, so she grabs her sword and runs over to like this area, and then she finds like the little boy, and then she kind of like just adopts him, and then she trains him on how to be like a sneaky asshole. And then at some point they get accosted by some like Englishmen or guards or something, and they want to like rape her, and so she like fights them, so they'll like hang her instead of burning her, instead of like raping her or whatever. And so but then Kenny like sneaks off, and they haven't seen each other in like 1,000 years or something. Holy shit, right? And so she wants to play mommy, and then they're all eating dinner, and she's like, "This is great, this is just like a real family." And Duncan and Kenny are like and then Duncan and old pirate man, I think his name's Kincaid, it's Kincaid, they run into each other, they get into an argument, and it's like, you can't trust that boy. And Duncan's like, "I know." And it's like, "How's it going?" And he's like, "Fuck you." And it's like, "What do you mean, fuck you? I thought we were buddies. I saved your life." And he's like, "No, fuck you. You left me on that island. I died like 1,000 times. I kept starving to death." And it's like, bro, just start swimming and then fall asleep because you run out of energy, and then wake up in the ocean and like swim back out. Like, the fuck, dude? Like, goddamn. Anyway. So so then they kind of fight, but then like some other guys show up, and he's still like a sailing captain, and he's like, "I'll get you later." And then Kenny, who's like following Duncan and being sneaky as shit, he shows up, and he's like, "Hey, you could kill me, but I could lure Duncan into a trap, and the only promise is I want Amanda because I want to kill her, or save hers." I don't know. It seemed like he wanted to kill her, but then later on he like doesn't kill her when he gets a chance, so it's kind of odd. And so so that they do that. So Kenny's like, Kincaid calls, is like, "I got your kid." And Amanda's like, I'm gonna save him. And Duncan's like, "That guy's, it's a trick, it's a trap." And she's like, "No, I don't believe it. I have to save my son." And so she runs off, and so of course Duncan goes to like this place, and then Duncan runs into Kincaid, and they start fighting. And then Kenny like sneaks up to the top, and right when Duncan's like pushed back against like a vent that blasts like hot air, he like turns it on and it like blasts Duncan in the face, so he can't like see very well. And then Kincaid, instead of being like a smart person and just like being like, "My time to shine," and like cutting off his head, he like taunts him and like stabs at him a little bit. He's like fucking around, and he's like, "I had to suffer, you will suffer." So like makes sense in the writing, right? It's just he's a dumbass. It's not like the writers are fine, because it's like they demonstrated earlier that like he was tortured, and he's kind of like crazy about it, and so he's like super excited to like fucking torture Duncan and then kill him. Unfortunately for him, Duncan like recovers and ends up cutting off his head. Meanwhile, Amanda shows up and finds Kenny like watching, and he's like, "You have to help Duncan." And like, Kincaid might be pushed back against the thing, and then you can use the thing against him, and then that'll be great. And she's like, "Okay, I'm going to do it." And so she does that, and then he puts handcuffs on her, and so then Duncan kills Kincaid and gets like the quickening or whatever. And then while he's weak, Kenneth tries to go down there to like cut his head off. And of course Amanda is Amanda, so she like got out of the handcuffs like real fucking easy, and like rolls up, and before Kenneth can be like sneakopotamus and cut Duncan's head off, she's like, "You have to fight me first, or like you do that, I'll kill you." And so Kenny's like, "Meow," and she's like, "Get out of here." And so he does, and then she like apologizes because Duncan was right all along about Kenneth being an asshole. And so then they like smooch, and then they go fuck some more. Yes, they do a lot in these episodes. So episode 7 focuses a bit on Amanda trying to help Joe and Duncan recover their friendship, pretty much. And also, it involves the Immortal of the Week. It's this like kind of douchebag guy, but at the same time, the things he does are not wholly without understanding. I gotta say. So the deal is okay. So the episode starts off, and Amanda is hanging out at Joe's bar, and she's talking about Duncan with him, and he's like, "Oh, we're not friends anymore because crossing lines, blah blah blah, bullshit." And she's like, "Come on, do it for me. Talk to Duncan. He's all satapotamus." And he's like, Joe's like, "All right, fine. Is that why you came here?" Or it's like, "Fine." And she's like, "Good. He's on his way. Yay!" And and then we see Duncan, and he's like going somewhere. He's in like a parking garage for some reason, and he's getting into his car, and then these two galoofs like show up, and they start messing with him, and then they fight, just like punching and stuff. Not an immortal guy, just like some immortals. And so Duncan beats up on them for a bit before they finally, let's go this way. They finally knock him out and put like a crazy person vest on there, like a restraining thingy. So because of that, Amanda gets like stood up, and then she watches this like blonde chick who's clearly wearing a wig, and is robbing this like old man, and then she stops her, and then they like chat, and then Amanda like adopts her as her pet, essentially. And so they go off and they cause like mischief and mayhem, and they're like talking about Duncan and yada yada, and Amanda's in love and whatnot. Meanwhile, Duncan is in a straitjacket. That's what it's called. So a straitjacket, and he's like trying to figure out how to get out of it. And these two galoofs are talking. Like one of them used to be like a professional boxer or something. And so Duncan like ends up like dislocating his like shoulders and his arms to like sneak out of this thing. It's pretty cool looking. And then he feels like the presence, of course. But because it doesn't have a sword or anything, he like gets out of there real quick. He then meets up with Amanda, who's still with this chick. And he's all torn up in the back of his shirt and all this stuff. And they like dismiss her, and she's like, "Oh, I'll talk to you later, sweetie." And so then they chat, and then they fuck most likely. And then Duncan explains that like the presence he felt, which I don't know, it's the rules are kind of hit or miss sometimes. But it's this Killian guy. So who's Killian? So we go to the flashback. The flashback is during World War I. Duncan was like a medic, and this guy was like a colonel, so he's like leading men into battle for like the British against the Germans. And while they're just like chit-chatting, and the guy's like, "You should be a leader of men, you're an immortal, blah blah blah," and Duncan's like, "I've been a leader of men, I don't like it, I just want to help people, I'm tired of like killing people stuff." And then he gets a letter. The guy's about to do like a trench charge, which is going to kill everybody, of course. And then he gets a letter, and it's like, "Hey, the war's over. Stop any aggressive action." And Duncan sees it, and he's like, "Oh, that's good." And the guy's like, "Nope, he's like, "Screw these orders, I'm out." And so Duncan takes it out of his hand and shows like the sergeant in command or whatever, like the guy like brought the message and like, "Hey, tell everybody the war's over, not to like follow this crazy person." And then the guy like shoots him and then runs off and is like, "Charge!" And everyone starts charging, trying to get him to stop. And then we find out later at the tribunal where they're gonna like sentence him to like a firing squad, and this guy like doesn't care obviously because he's immortal, so he's like firing squad away. That he there was like 300 guys who died for this like pointless charge, and he makes one valid point. He's like, "The Germans will be back," and it's like, yeah, but you just killed 300 people, like not like was completely unnecessary, and you did nothing. The war's still over. Anyway. And so then Duncan is sitting there, and he's like, "Hold up, I got a better idea." He's like, wait, don't shoot the guy. He's crazy. You got to put him in a crazy house. And the guy's like, "No, you know what you're doing." And he does. So the guy goes into like an insane asylum for their like life. And so that's why he's so pissed off at Duncan. And so what his whole plan, this Killian guy, is not to, he doesn't want to cut Duncan's head off because that's too easy. It's another one of these like, just cut his head off and move on with your day. But he doesn't. What he wants to do is lock him up and let him like rot for like 70 years so that he can understand, because this guy rotted for 7 years in like an insane asylum. And so what happens is the next day Duncan and Amanda go to visit this like the new pet of Amanda, I don't know what else to call her, and she has like cut off her clearly wig, and she's supposed to have gotten like a haircut and a hair dye because now she looks exactly like Amanda. And we get some sweet fan service in this episode of Amanda too. We see her in like just a bra, and it's like, wow, she's got nice tits. Anyway, so it's like she's like a little mini me, and Amanda's like so pleased with herself. She's like, yay! And it's not just for like the creep factor this happens. We get later that Killian's like, I want this guy now, and they're like, oh, we got pictures of him hanging out with like this lady And there's a point where like we see a watcher like taking pictures of all this stuff going on, and so there's some like sketchy stuff with that because there's a whole thing where like Joe like helps Duncan out, but then it seems like this lady is helping Killian out on some level because it's like, how do you get these pictures? Like, I don't know. Anyway, there's a picture of Duncan with like Amanda, but it doesn't show her face, and so they grab up this other girl who's like the mini me of Amanda, and then this guy's like really into spiders and like making wet traps or something. He has a whole like monologue about like spiders and different kinds of spiders. Anyway. So they capture this girl, and he puts a spider on her. She's like, "I'm not the girlfriend. That's Amanda. I'm just like a mini me." And there, he's like, "Oh, I believe you." So then he shows up to Duncan's like dojo, and then so Duncan and Amanda feel it, and so they go downstairs, and this girl has like spiders all over her with like deadly poison. So he's like, "Amanda, take care of this." And so then Duncan goes to like he tracks this guy down, and he's like, "All right, let's fight, motherfucker." But then his galoofs like come up behind and shoot him. And it's like, oh no, Duncan's dead. But nope, the guy just puts him in like a little cell in like an abandoned like Air Force barracks or something, an Air Force brig, and he's just gonna leave him there to like rot for 7 years. And there's like liver and stuff. And so then he's super pleased about that whole situation. So meanwhile, Amanda is like, hey Joe, something, you gotta help. And he's like, I can't help, that's against the rules, something. And finally she convinces him to do it. And so he meets with this other immortal lady, and she's like, oh, I've heard rumors about you in Paris. And he's like, oh, that's funny. Anyway, he's very sly about it. He's like, oh, I'm trying to wrap up Duncan's like case file because Killian killed him. And she's like, oh, he didn't kill him. He like locked him up in these barracks. And Joe's like, oh, okay, well, I'll just wait around then. And so Amanda clearly, Duncan's like, he's not just sitting around. He's trying to figure out a way to break out of this cell with like the tin cans of like food. And he sets up like this whole funny trap where he's like moves stuff around. He's going to hide behind. And then Amanda shows up and he's like, hooray. And so Amanda gets him out. And then he's like, how'd you find me? And she's like, ta-da, Joe. And it was like most obvious thing that could possibly happen. And then they kind of like chat for a second. But then the Killian guy, one of his galoofs comes up and he's like, oh, I don't know what happened. The guy's gone. And Killian's like, no. And he runs in there. And then Duncan like pops down the stairs. He's like, haha, motherfucker. And so they fight. And Killian gets his ass whooped because he's been like in a prison cell for 7 years and is not kept up on the fighting thing. And so he kills him. And then Amanda feels like super bad about something. And so she's going to leave. Hey, buddy, we're almost done. And so she's going to like take off. So this is like the end of the Amanda arc. It's not quite mid-season, so it's kind of early. It's like episode 7. Anyway, so they like kiss and and screw around, and then she takes off, and then Duncan goes to meet with Joe so they can have a drink and chat, and that wraps up episode 7. Episode 8 starts off with Richie and Duncan heading out from like some artsy French movie. Richie complaining that it's not a Schwarzenegger film. Fantastic. We then see this like sketchy dude, like a sketchy like loan shark kind of guy talking to somebody and then getting into a car and driving off. A bit later, the guy he was talking to is wearing a mask, and he walks up to this guy who's running like a grocery store or something and fires at him. Duncan and Richie see what's going on because the guy's immortal and they sense him first. And Duncan saves the guy's life, but unfortunately, the guy's wife, who was like inside the store, gets shot. Richie and Duncan know that yet. They chase down the guy. It ends up being somebody that Duncan knows from his past, and they start to fight, but then the police show up and the guy gets arrested. We then find out that this guy was like a baron, I want to say. He was some sort of lord in England during like the English-French War, French-English War, whatever it is. And that Duncan had a buddy who was like a different lord, and he wanted to like do something to help the Scots and like end the war or something, and the Queen wants to end the war. But then this guy wants to keep going because there's like other people who are invested in the war and they are making money from it and stuff. So essentially just like the exact same thing that's happening right now because nothing ever changes. And so he tricks the buddy into, this guy's name's like Kinman. Kinman tricks Duncan's buddy into dueling with him, and then Duncan tries to get the guy Kinman to like not to do it to death, but to do it to like first blood. So they have the duel, and then he gets first blood, and it's like ta-da! And then the guy starts taunting the buddy some more, which causes the guy to attack him, and then Kinman's able to kill him. Duncan then, of course, wants justice. Kinman so he goes and talks to the Queen about the whole situation. She hates this guy. He hates this guy. It's going to go get revenge. She has like a whole war with the French she's trying to deal with. So she's like, Duncan, I don't need my lords fighting, and everyone united. I order you as your queen not to get into a fight, not to fight this guy. And he's like, all right, I swear. And so then later on, he's back at like the pub where they're all hanging out, where his buddy got taunted to get into the duel in the first place. And Kinman shows up with another asshole, and he's like, he taunts Duncan a bunch, calls him a coward, and then Duncan just does the honorable thing and stands by his oaths and heads out of there. Which we've already seen Duncan break one of his oaths in like season 2, so whatever. That's like new Duncan, I guess. So And then everyone calls him a coward. And so back in the present, there's this like FBI lady investigating the murder of the woman, and she wants Duncan and Richie to testify because they caught the guy, but he didn't have his gun, he didn't have the mask. There were no other witnesses or whatever besides like the store owner. And I guess the store owner didn't see him. He just saw the guy with the mask, right? And so she comes and pesters them. They're like, no, no, no. And Richie's like, why don't we just tell him? And Duncan's concerned because this guy is like an excellent fighter and that, you know, he could easily kill Richie and Duncan might have a hard time against him. Of course he doesn't because it's Duncan McLeod. But, you know, there's a chance. So they both refuse, and it's like the whole mortal thing too, and like all that crap. So they don't testify, and then they get harassed by like the guy, and then the guy whose wife died, who was supposed to die, and then the daughter. He brings like his daughters to like guilt them into like testifying, and there's a whole thing with that. And they're like no, and he calls him a coward, which reminds Duncan of the thing, right? And then we find out. Oh, so then we get a scene with Kinman being interrogated by the FBI lady and her partner. And she like pulls a gun on him, and her partner's like, "The fuck's going on here?" And so he goes off to like get something after he like takes her gun away, and then dun dun dun, Kinman and the woman start making out. Of course they're fucking. And so then he utilizes that because Duncan eventually decides he's going to testify against Kinman, and so he goes and he like points him out, and then the lady is obviously working for Kinman, and she throws some of shade on his like testimony, even though she was like begging for it before, which is absurd. Either way, they're taking him to prison now, or jail, whatever the thing is, and she betrays her partner and shoots him, and then Kim and her go off into like the woods, and then she's trying to figure out how she's gonna like play the whole thing off as in like she was kidnapped by him and whatnot, and he's like, that's a good idea, you should play it off as I kidnapped you and then attacked you and you ran away. Only difference is you die, bang bang, and so he kills her. And then meanwhile Duncan goes to confront store owner guy about like, why did someone hire a hitman after you? That doesn't make any sense, which it doesn't. And so we find out that guy had some like shady loans with that shady loan sharks in the beginning, and that he wasn't paying them, or that something else was going on. And so hence the reason the gunman was hired in the first place. And he's like, oh, what was me? Something, bullshit. And Duncan's like, okay. So then Duncan tracks that guy down and is like, hey, leave David alone, or whatever the guy's name is. And the guy's like, you make me, get him, boys. And then Duncan beats the shit out of his like goon. And then he's like, I told you to watch yourself. Don't do it again. But it's, all that is a wash because Kinman, after he kills the police lady, he's trying to get out of the country, and he goes and tracks down this guy and is like, all right, give me my money. And he's like, whatever, man, you didn't kill the guy, you get no money. And the guy's like, you better fucking give me your money. And the guy's like, oh yeah, blah blah blah. And then Kinman shoots him, and the guy's like, oh, and then Kinman goes on this like epic rant about how like things used to be done honorably and all this stuff. Now you got these fucking guns, and he shoots and kills the guy, and he's like, oh, if only life had a challenge for me. And then that's when Duncan rolls up and is like, bitch, let's do this. And the guy starts shooting at him, and it's like, motherfucker, he just out on a whole tirade about like honorable fighting and whatnot. Whatever. What an asshole. So then they fight, and Duncan of course wins, and then Duncan goes later on to the grocery store to talk to the guy who survived. He's like, hey, that guy you owed money to is gone. And he's like, yeah, I heard on the street. It's like, all right, 40-year-old white man. I guess it's Gotham City, everybody's involved in the streets. Anyway, and then Duncan's like, oh yeah, Kinman, don't worry about it, he got taken care of. Dun dun. And that's the end of the episode. So far, episode 8 here is probably the weakest episode of the 4th season, but it's still pretty good. It's still not bad at all. All right, back on track with episode 9, though, because it focuses on India and has some fucking hot Indian chicks in it. Yeah, boy! We're back! So, this one focuses around the statue of Kali. Yeah, that's what it is. And an Indian immortal, I can't remember his name, but who was a member of the cult of Kali, which is this like assassin's cult that kills a lot of people. And this statue is like seen by this guy and his group, and he's like the last member of this group because he's immortal, as like an actual, like the actual Kali, like an actual god, piece of their god, right? Because the whole Hindu thing is like about avatars and all this stuff, like pieces of their divine essence and whatnot. I don't really go into it in this. But a large focus is on the past, because past is very important. So we're going to go through the present because it's less important, and then we'll talk about the past. Let's talk about the past first. So in the past, Duncan was working for the British Empire still, and he was in India as like a representative, and then this total douchebag noble guy showed up with his like wafy wife, I was told multiple times in this that she's beautiful, and I was like, meh. Yeah, I'm not into white chicks at all, so I don't know, I guess. Anyway, So she immediately wants to fuck Duncan and spends the majority of like the time that Duncan's around with her trying to lure him into fucking her, and he absolutely refuses. At some point they're wandering around and she's complaining, and her husband, the noble guy's complaining about India and all this stuff, and then the Indian immortal guy is actually representative of like the king. That's not called the king. Anyway, the leader of India at this time, like under the British rule. And so they're there to make like a trade, and they're talking about these like people who are like killing a bunch of people and what they're going to do about it, and trying to negotiate between like India and Britain, because Britain's like overcame this whole situation. Anyway, at some point, they find this funeral pyre. They're going to burn this guy to death. Or this guy's already dead. They're going to cremate him. And then they're bringing his, like, wife over. And she's going to get thrown on there, burned alive as well, because that's, like, her duty. And then Duncan and her, like, make eye contact. And he's like, hell no. So he goes and takes her. And then she's mad, but she's not really mad because she didn't really want to die, right? And so he did save her. And then there's a whole thing where they, like, fall in love. And then they fuck. But at some point, God, what was this guy's name? The Indian immortal guy shows up and talks to her, and she decides she wants to, like, because the whole thing with Hinduism too is like the reincarnation, and a lot of religions out east. And so she has this whole conversation with McLeod about like living forever and about reincarnation and about the immortality of the soul, right? So they have they have a back and forth about that, and then she like has sex with Duncan and like falls in love with him and tells him that she fell in love, and then she goes to like be killed and then burned at the pyre. And then Duncan like finds her, and the guy's like, hey man, he's like, you did this to her. And he's like, no, she did this to herself. She came to me and was like, yo, I want to make atonement for like not following through with like the wishes of like my religion, but I want to have like one night with McLeod. And he's like, dope. And so then Duncan like burns her up, and it's super sad. So then we come to the present, and this guy he's looking for the statue. He finds the guy who sold it to like this American university, which has this like Indian woman working there who's like friends with McLeod. And so he kills that guy by strangling him with a thing. And part of this assassination thing is they always strangled with silk, right? That gets talked about kind of back and forth throughout the episode. Anyway, so then the guy shows up, and him and Duncan are kind of like, they're not friends, but they like have like they're like a neutral, right? They're kind of like at peace with one another. And so then the guy starts training Richie actually, and like fighting and stuff like that. And he's been around for a long time, and he's very expert at like he beats up Duncan when they do like a quarterstaff duel, and he beats Duncan, and it's very impressive. And Richie and him are just like training, and he's like, the guy's kind of like preaching to Richie about like the glory of his culture in India and like living up and having something to live for. And Richie gets sad about it. Because he's just like, I grew up on like fast food and bowling alleys. And the guy's like, hey man, as time goes by, you're going to like look back on these times and be like, this is like my people. This is my thing. Trust me. Like, it may not seem like a big deal now, but we're immortals. We have a lot of time to like sit and think about all this stuff. And so Richie and him really connect. And then Duncan doesn't dislike the guy either. And he actually helps the guy get the statue back from the university. Right, but the deal is, he's like, hey man, I got your statue back. Please just take it to India and leave, and don't kill this woman and don't kill anybody else, because I know that you love killing people. And he's like, okay. But then Duncan catches him trying to kill this lady. And so Duncan's like, man, all you have to do is go back to India. And the guy's like, I am God. I pass judgment. I am Kali. Whatever. And he's like, we're not gods. And then they fight, and Duncan beats him this time, obviously, because there's like 2 more seasons of this shit in like a movie. And cuts his head off because there will be only one. And then he feels like super bad about it because like he pretty much agreed with the guy for the most part. He just didn't agree with like killing mortals for no reason. And so it's like this one piece of thing was like the end of this guy's life and his long journey, and like he knows he had a good connection with like his son, essentially, who's Richie. Anyway, so then later on, Duncan and Richie are kind of like training at the dojo, and like they're talking about it, and Richie's like pretty sad about the whole thing, and Duncan's like, yeah, I agree, but we're not gods, and like sometimes you got to just put people in their place, and like it sucks, but this is how it is. And so they have a nice little moment too. And so it's an excellent episode. We're back. So episode 8 is really the only kind of mediocre episode thus far, except episode 9 is crushing it once again. And it's got Vashti, who's like, fuck yes, more of this, please. No more of these white chicks. Damn. Like, especially they're all blonde. Like Tessa, other girl, Anne was brunette, but still. And then there's like blonde. The English chick was blonde, like gross. Yeah, I'm good. But Vashti's hot as shit.
This next episode's pretty fun. We get almost the whole crew back together. There's no Joe and there's no Amanda, but we got Richie doing like kind of a predominant role as much as he ever does. And then, and I'm sick, I apologize. And then we got Mythos rolling out to give some like hard wisdom to Duncan about being like too honorable and stuff, which he right, but and Duncan's done that in the past where it's like there's all these, he could have avoided so much tears and so much death if he had just like done the right thing and killed some other effer like originally, but he doesn't. So what is it? Monster of the week this time is, it's like Kristen I think it's Christina. It's some bizarre. At first I thought it was Christina, but it's not. It's like Kristina. Christina, something like that. Anyway, her and Duncan, so Duncan, like, quote unquote, rescued her from some bandits, like, back in, like, the 1600s. And then she was, like, a noble lady who was super into fashion and stuff. And so she, like, adopted him as, like, her pet lover. And so they, like, banged it out a bunch. And he, like, she dressed him up and, like, wanted him to, like, do all this stuff. And she taught him a lot of stuff. There's, like, some indication that, like, all the kind of, like, a lot of the noble stuff, or, like, how he was able to, like, insert himself into a lot of, like, noble situations afterward, or specifically because of this woman. At some point, he was kind of like, I'm good. I'm not really that into this chick. And then he falls in love with this painter girl who is painting a portrait of him for Christina. And so when he tries to break up with Christina, she gets, like, super mad, and she calls out, like, this painter chick, and he's like, yeah, you right. And, and so she drowns her. But then claims she didn't. Claims that she was just overwhelmed with emotion or whatever. It's like this whole ridiculous girl thing. Sorry, jeez. And then they fight, and he beats her, and he's about to cut her head off. And she's like, just kill me. I can't live without you. And all this crazy stuff. And she tries to, like, stab him in the back at some point. And he's like, no, because he's, like, chivalrous, yeah. And so back in like the modern times, we see Duncan, and the show starts, like, in the past. Yeah, it does. So back in the present, Richie has, like, a best friend, like one of these, like, foster kids he, like, grew up with, who's wants to be a model, and so he goes with her to, like, Christina's modeling agency. Neither Duncan nor him know that she's here doing this, but, you know, he senses that she's an immortal, and then she immediately wants to take Richie because he's so cute as, like, her new sex pet. And so she does, and they, like, bang it out. And then at some point, Duncan's just kind of hanging out, and he feels the presence of somebody. And I'm like, oh, it's Richie coming back to, like, talk about his conquest. But nope, it's Mythos. Mythos is like, hey, what's up, homie? And he's like, hey, what's up? And so Mythos is like, hey, so Christina is back around here, just so you know, back in Gotham. And Duncan's like, don't care, fuck her. And he's like, well, but fuck her maybe, but more like Richie's fucking her right now. And it's like, what? And he's like, I'm going to run over to, like, whatever. And he's like, Richie's probably still in bed. Wink, wink. And then we get, like, a sex scene with Richie and Christina. All right. And so then there's a lot of back and forth between Richie and Duncan about Duncan's trying to, like, teach him, like, don't trust this woman. She's insane, crazy, blah, blah, blah. Tells the story, which is like, this time it's different. It's been like 300 years, yada, yada, yada. And so he goes off, and they have like a modeling shoot. They get into it again because he's like making out with Christina, and then Duncan shows up and tries to warn him, and then she's like, tee-hee, boys are fighting over me. I love this. And Richie, like, stays with her. But then later, Richie's friend is like, oh, hey, I got an offer so she signs with Christina, and then she's like, I got an offer from this other group, but they will not work with Christina for whatever reason, and so it's for like $500,000, and I want to do that, but I'd have to break the contract. And Richie's like, well, let me talk to Christina. She's like my lover. He doesn't realize he's a pet yet, because even though Duncan's telling him, he doesn't want to hear. And during this whole time, Mythos keeps talking to Duncan, keeps giving him a hard time. He's like, hey, man, you had a chance to kill this chick like twice, and you have another chance to kill her, and you refuse to kill her. And, like, he's like, yeah, I have some honor. And he's like, maybe you have too much honor, and something. And Mythos is like 5,000 years old, and he's like, this chivalry thing was like a fad. Right? He's like, fuck your chivalry. It's so good. I love Mythos. Like, no lie, he's one of my favorite characters in the show. Anyway, and so Richie, like, goes to talk to Christina, and he, like, explains the whole situation with his friend, and then she flips out and is like, no, I refuse. And then Richie's like, all right, whatever. Well, I'm pissed off at you because you're not, like, helping me out, and I thought we were, like, friends with benefits. And she's like, no, I own you, and I own her, and I own things. And Richie's like, maybe Duncan was right. And then he, like, turns to leave, and she pulls out a sword and, like, stabs him. And so Richie has to, like, jump out a window to, like, not be his head cut off because he's, like, ill-prepared for the situation. And then he goes and, like, hey, Duncan, you right. And Duncan's like, I told you I right. And then he tells him the rest of the story about how this chick, like, will kill this other girl most likely because that's how she works. And then Richie's like, fuck, I gotta go check on her. So he runs off, and then Mythos is like, Duncan's like getting ready to leave. Mythos is like, where are you going? And he's like, I'm going to Christina's house, because that's probably where this girl actually is. And we don't see Richie for, like, the rest of the episode. But so Duncan and Mythos is like, oh, I'm going to tag along to help you. And so they go over there, and we switch over to Christina, who was meeting with this girl, and she's like drugged her, and he like shoves her in a pool, which is the same way she killed like Duncan's painter friend. And so like, you know, the history is a cycle or a circle or something. So they chat a little bit, and then Duncan has like flashbacks because she tries his same like manipulative technique to get him to do what she wants, and they fight, and he beats her, and instead of cutting her head off, he's like, hey, promise me you'll leave my friends and everything alone. And then Mythos walks over as Duncan walks off and is like, nah, bitch, pick up your sword, we're doing this. And then he kills her, cuts her head off, and Duncan's like kind of sad about it. But they wrap up with like a chit chat with Richie afterwards about growing up and learning things and all that, so it's pretty good. So we have another fun episode for season 4 here. It stars Duncan, of course, and we also got Mythos doing his own thing over there. We got some Joe. And then we have our monster of the week. Sorry, I'm sick. Who's Walter, who is like an old British, I don't know, playwright / actor or something from back in the day. And him and Duncan know each other because they like did theater post Shakespeare, but like before the modern era. I didn't catch exactly when it was. I think it was like the 1700s or something. Anyway, and so there's some like funny stuff about that, and there's some talk about how like this guy just wishes he was better at like life so he could be a better actor, or he could actually write his own stuff, because he writes mostly what he knows is all the Shakespeare stuff, and he's like, he wishes Shakespeare was an immortal so he could continue doing whatever, and yada yada. And so they kind of just like talk about that, and this is all like in the past. And again, when they go over these episodes, I'm just like combining all the flashbacks essentially, because it's like good information to have, and it's not really like spoiling anything per se, because we just get to know this guy as like time goes on. Anyway, and so that we just know this guy, he's like kind of butthurt about not being as creative as like some of the great geniuses, and he wishes that their genius could be carried forward, and he wishes there's something he could do about it. And so that's like his whole bang, or his whole bag. And then him and Duncan are like kind of friends, not super friends. Anyway, so from there, we go to the present. So the present, we see this like pretty like black Asian chick, who is playing piano excellently, and then we see a guy trying to like kill her by she's like on a stage in like a theater, and he's like cutting the rope that's holding up like the lighting above the piano situation. And then Duncan shows up, and he senses an immortal, and so he runs up and grabs this lady, Claudia, pretty sure her name is, let me see real quick, yep, Claudia, and pulls her out of the way. And then he's like, oh goodness, something. Anyway, so he takes her back to his place to like kind of protect her and make sure she doesn't get killed. And then Duncan runs into this guy, and it's Walter. They're kind of buddies, and so they have a conversation, and we find out that Claudia is like a pre-immortal, right? So we've learned, and I've learned, that immortals can sense other immortals before they become immortal, because it's not the same as like the duh thing, but it's like, oh, they get a sense. It's like, oh, this guy. So apparently he like found her a long time ago, and like she was like singing at a dive bar or whatever, and so he like sponsored her to go to like Juilliard and all this stuff, and she there's nothing ever sexual there, just kind of like friends, or like him just trying to help another immortal out and do like the right thing and whatnot. And now Walter wants to like take over and like train her to be like an excellent musician and do this and that, and really kind of like groom her. And the show implies in like all the connotation that comes with that word. And Duncan's like, nah, man, let her be human. Like, there's no reason. He's like, no, she's at the prime of her life. She's so beautiful, and she's so fantastic and creative, and yada, yada, yada. It's like, now's the time to bring her into the fold or whatever. And Duncan's like, let her live her life. And they go back and forth about that. And it's like, not that big of a deal, because like, if this Walter guy does kill her, then whatever. And so then Walter kind of like meets her, and they chat, and they're having like a grand old time talking about how great music she is and sharing all this stuff. And Duncan like warns her about him, and she's like, whatever, dad. Right. Meanwhile, let's just go over this side story. So the Mythos is hanging out at Joe's bar. They're just like chilling and stuff. And he's got this waitress, we'll call her 6 because she's a 6 out of 10. But Mythos is like madly in love with her immediately, and like flirts with her and like asks her out. And Joe's like, hey man, I don't think she's that interested. You back off. And Mythos is like, nah, I can tell, man. I've been around for 5,000 years. She's kind of interested. And so he like flirts with her some more, and finally gets her to like go on a date with him. And he's like, yeah, boy. And Joe's like, hey man, you better watch that and just be careful. And he's like, yeah, whatever, bro. Like, I know what your fucking problem is. And then we find out later, because Mythos shows up for like the date, and she's not around, and she's like home or something. Oh no, this is before that. So then Mythos is like, what's your fucking deal, bro? And he's like, she's dying. And it's like, and he's like, yeah, you're all dying.
Just like facts. And he's like, no, like real soon. And then Mythos is like, oh, okay, well, whatever. He's like, you're all dying. I've been around for 5,000 years. Like your 100 years of life is like nothing to me. Anyway, so then he shows up for like the date, and she's home because she's not feeling well. And so Mythos goes, and they have like a conversation, and she's like, I can't love you, and they like make out a little bit, and then he's like, no, it doesn't matter if you live 100 years or like 1 year. You got to live your life to the fullest and embrace living and yada yada yada. And she's like, okay, let's do it. And so then they decide they're gonna get in a van and just like travel the country and like until she dies or whatever. And Mythos is just gonna take care of her and whatnot, which is kind of like a sweet story. Mythos is like, I'm so excited, this is fun. Excuse me. And Joe's like, well, good luck. And Duncan and him are like watching him, and they're like, huh. Anyway, so before that. So that's like the Mythos story. It has like nothing to do with the main story at all. It kind of ties in actually, and like because the writers in the show are actually very good at what they're doing, because then finally Walter like tricks Claudia into like taking flowers from him. Well, he gives him flowers. She's like, hooray! And then he shoots her when Duncan's like not close enough to stop him. He's like, new motherfucker. And then like later on, she's like, I'm an immortal now. This is fucking awesome. And like, yeah. And her and Walter are like, yay, immortals, playing music and stuff. And then she like loses her inspiration or whatever because she's like immortal. So she's like, I don't know. It's some weird bullshitty like artisty thing where she's just not as talented. And Walter and her get into like an argument about it. And then finally she's like, leave me alone, you asshole. And Duncan's like, come on, let's get out of here. And so Duncan's like, you need to learn how to sword fight. She's like, I'm not gonna learn a sword fight. And he's like, I'm gonna take you to a monastery. She's like, why would I go to a monastery? And he's like, because we can't be bothered in sacred ground, and you can like figure your shit out. And she's like, fine. So they go there, and then they get like not jumped, they get ambushed by Walter, who like rolls up to like cut her head off, and then he shoots Duncan, and then he's about to cut her head off or threaten her to cutting her head off if she doesn't like come back with him and like be better at music. And then Duncan like gets up, pulls his sword on that guy, and he's like, oh, this is how we're gonna do things, huh? You know I'm a better sword fighter than you. And Duncan's like, it's been a couple 100 years, motherfucker. And so then she like runs off into the monastery, and then they fight, and then Duncan of course beats Walter and is like, he's like, and then this guy keeps like quoting Shakespeare, and Duncan's like, cut it the fuck out, motherfucker. Like, quit being a weirdo. And so they have like a chit chat, and Duncan's like, you gotta promise me. And he's like, I promise to like leave Claudia alone for now, for like, I don't know, a while, forever, but whatever. They live forever, so it doesn't matter. To leave her alone and mind your own fucking business. And he's like, I promise. And he's like, let me see your hands. And like, Walter's like, oh man, I was crossing my finger. Like, the fuck? And so he shows him his hands, like, all right. And he's like, you promise? And Walter's like, fine, I promise. And they hug it out, and then they walk off. And then we see, I know, right? And then, god damn. And so then Claudia is like playing the piano, and she's like, oh, ever since Walter threatened my life, I realized that I did want to live, and I don't want to, I still have like the musical creation because there's the threat of death, and so I'm gonna go off on my own and like do music and stuff. And Duncan's like, all right, well, here, let me train you how to use a sword first. And she's like, fuck that sword, I like being scared of death, it helps me be more creative, and that's the most important thing to me, so I'm out, adios bitches. Then at the very end, Duncan and Joe were like watching Mythos go, and they're like, so Claudia is like, oh, she just took off. And it's like, oh yeah, like no protection, nothing. He's like, nope. And then Joe makes the comment. He's like, huh, we have two people wandering off on their own, one to find a way to live, and one to find a way to die. And Duncan's like, yep. And that's episode 11. Oh man. Episode 12 is the first episode of this season that's kind of meh, to be completely honest. There's no immortals to fight, and the threat is kind of very minimal, if you will. Like the show tries to like really play it up, but it spends a lot of time in the past. So we'll talk about that, but we'll talk about the present first. So Duncan and Richie are just like hanging out or whatever, and then there's like a cave-in or an explosion, or it's like a gas line that blew up or something, and it causes this huge like issue in Gotham where there's like all this stuff collapsing, and there's like people trapped underground and all this stuff, and it's like it's like really kind of wild stuff going on. And Duncan offers to like help, obviously, but then the people who like run the city, like the firemen and all that stuff, are like, no, get out of here, we'll take care of it. And it's like, okay, that's fair. And so the okay, but who doesn't like mind their own business and let the city take care of their stuff is Anne. That's right, Anne's back, and she's super pregnant. And being a super pregnant doctor, she thinks the best idea is to sneak past the firemen and all the line and all that crazy nonsense, and to get underground to see if she can help
And it's like, bro, you're like 8 months pregnant. Like, what are you doing? Anyway, so she goes down, and then there's like another cave in, and she gets trapped. It stresses up this guy, but he dies, and then it's just her stuck with this other woman. And then dun to dun, she starts like giving birth like 8 weeks early, and so this woman's trying to like help her, and she's freaking out, obviously. Meanwhile, Duncan somehow figures out that Anne is underground or whatever, so him and Richie go to like help out and rescue her. So Duncan goes like into the ground to try to like rescue her, while Richie tries to work with like the firemen to, you know, also help or something. And he somehow convinces like the fire chief or whatever to like give him a fireman's coat and to help out because he's like some 20-year-old kid or 18-year-old kid or whatever. Right. Anyway, so oh goodness. But and so we like I said, most of the episode is like in the past, so pretty quickly Anne starts like freaking out, and then she goes into like contractions, and then Duncan's able to like dig his way down to where she's at and be with her while she like gives birth to this girl that she calls Mary. And it's like, oh, Mary is the name of Duncan's mom, and she's like, I know, I asked Joe about it. Oh, so even though they can't be together because she can't handle it, she's still like in love and wants there to be a piece of him that's part of her life or whatever. And then Richie and the firemen like get down there as well, and they start rescuing everybody, and the baby ends up being okay and whatnot. And this is a surprise. I guess this whole beginning of this season, like the first 12 episodes, were what I have not called, but I am now calling the house building arc. Or at least a lot of season 4 is this house building arc thing, where he's just like working on a house, and like periodically within each of these episodes for like at least the last 10 episodes. I think he bought the house in the second or third episode, because we have the one with the Japanese girl, and then we have Charlie's whole thing. I can't remember if he's building the house then or not. Anyway, but him and Richie are just building a house. And so finally the house is like all complete and all done. And then he gives it away to Marie, his like quote unquote not real daughter, but like the daughter of the woman he loved who had sex with her friend when they broke up because she was in a weak spot and the guy was an asshole. Anyway, and then Richie and him have a conversation about it, how you know, whatever, something, and he's like, yeah, man, it's, you know, it's a good thing to do. Like, I just wanted her to be happy, and, you know, I'm not doing it for Anne, technically, I'm doing it for Marie, so everyone's like cool with it and whatnot. Okay, so what's the flashback? The flashback is during World War II, the bombings that took place in London, and Duncan is like heavily involved romantically with this chick named Diane, and she's like an American news reporter, and so she's doing like news reporting stuff in England about the war and trying to get like the Americans to join the war, which is awful because we never should have joined that war, but that's neither here nor there. And so, you know, she keeps telling her that, you know, she's going to stay away because she's going to get killed. And, you know, there's the whole thing with like Churchill's speech and yada, yada, yada. And eventually they get trapped underground too, right? So that's like it's a flashback that keeps coming up. And there's like a gas leak, and obviously Duncan's going to be okay because he's immortal, but she's not. And so he tries to keep her like alive as much as he can, being trapped underground with like gas pouring out or something. But he is unable to do so. And right before she dies, like shortly before they're able to like dig them all out. Holy sorry, traffic's really bad. And so that's sad for him, I guess. That's how it relates to this episode. So anyway, the whole thing was pretty weak. Again, no immortals. It's kind of like Duncan's fine the whole time, and it's just like, oh, Anne, you remember Anne, don't you? And I was like, yeah, I guess. I mean, she like has popped up periodically here. Hopefully she doesn't like come back for good. I was not the biggest fan of her and their relationship, but it was all right, I guess. But yeah, there you go. So, and the house is gone, and that moves us on to the next phase of this show. And that phase is the dark quickening. Yes, the dark quickening. Anyway, this is like a 2-part episode, as they do sometimes back in the 90s or whatever. I think this came out like 96. Anyway, so what is the dark quickening? Well, the dark quickening apparently there's, what's this guy's name? Koltek. He's like a Native American guy that Duncan met a long time ago. We don't spend a lot of time in flashback in this episode. Pretty much Duncan, if you remember, like way back in season 1, I want to say, he had like that wife who I guess was Sue. I don't know if it defined it before, but they said Sue like 5 times in this episode. So if I missed it before, I got it this time. So he's like married to the Sioux woman, and it's like the same situation with Anne and her getting knocked up. Essentially, like she already has a kid, or he like adopted a kid whose dad died, and they were like living like this fun little life, or whatever. And then like the white man came and killed everybody, and then so what happened afterwards? He buried everybody, and like he has that like resort he has outside of Gotham where he can like go and be at peace with like the world. Which again, like, it brings a lot of questions about the tenuous geography that exists in here. Because the funny thing is, at one of these episodes, they mention New York City, but it's like they don't mention them living in New York City. But obviously, the show is like filmed in New York City, or it's supposed to be some big city. I think it's supposed to. That's the thing. I think it's filmed in Toronto, but it's supposed to be like an American city in like the Midwest, because they were talking about how like the Sioux tribe that Duncan belonged to, that was like right over there, because there's like the holy ground that's just like right outside of town, and like the Sioux were like in the middle of the country. They were like not on the East Coast at all. Anyway, neither here nor there. So Koltek has magic. Obviously, we know that magic exists from like what was it called? The final something from the second high, or that technically the third Final Dimension, the third movie with the Kong guy, with Connor McLeod. We watched second in chronological order, in like my like bullshitty kind of like chronological order. That's not, it's like multiple things going on. Anyway, and so he can like absorb. He purposely like absorbs the darkness from people's hearts or whatever. And at some point in like the flashback, so Duncan's going on like a revenge trip. He ends up in jail. He meets Jim Koltek, and he's like, oh, you have much darkness in you. Let me take it away from you. And Duncan's like, that's some old bullshit. And he's like, here, take this. And so he gives him like ayahuasca or something. Yep. And then they go on like hallucinogenic like trip in like the mind of Duncan to like cleanse him of his evil, and like Koltek takes it on. And then at some point he stopped killing immortals because he had filled his cup, even though he thought it was like forever. And we get a scene. So the episode actually starts off with Duncan getting a call from Jim, and he's like, hey, I'm coming to town, we can hang out. And he's like, yeah, man, that sounds great. And then he's like stops at a gas station, and this other immortal's like robbing a Chinese man. And I say that because the guy's like, I'm gonna fuck this Chinaman up, who's running this like convenience store / gas station. And then Jim like tries to absorb the darkness from the guy, and then they go out and like fight, and then he's too overwhelmed with darkness. So then there's another flashback in this episode where there's like some like shady comedian guy or whatever that just talks about death that Duncan wants to go fight because he's super pissed off at him for some reason I didn't catch. Anyway, Jim kills him too, so Duncan doesn't have to take on the dark quickening or like his evil or whatever. And that was like the last person he killed before this guy. And that's actually the guy that kind of like his dark quickening personality kind of like comes forward in Jim. And so Duncan tries to like reason with him a couple times. Jim almost kills like Richie. And then they have like a lot of like conversations with Dawson. Joe Dawson about the dark quickening and how it's a myth and not a real thing and yada yada and like magic and shit. And then like Richie talks about like Highlander magic, or not Highlander magic, immortal magic and stuff, and werewolves. This episode is like all over the fucking place. Like no lie. Anyway, at some point, Duncan confronts Koltek, and Koltek's like, you can't kill me. You're going to absorb all this darkness inside you. And in my head, it's like, if that's a concern, just get like someone else to come over and cut his head off like a human, right? But whatever. I mean, there's plenty of watchers. They could like kind of figure this out, but they don't. So Duncan kills him, and then we get like some super cringe because Adrian Peterson... Not Adrian Peterson. Is it Adrian Peterson? I think that's his name. The actor who plays Duncan MacLeod now has to pretend to be like evil, and he's not the best actor. At this point in season 4, he's crushing it as Duncan because he's played this guy for like 4 years now. But like, hey, can you play like a wacky villain version of Duncan? And it's like, oof, not great. And so now he's kind of evil, so he goes to like kill Richie, but then Joe like shoots him. Yeah, this episode just keeps going, bro. This is not even like the next episode. And so Joe shoots him and then ties him up, and then he's like, hey, Richie, you better get out of here. And Richie like disappears for a while. So that Duncan can work on himself or whatever. And then Joe like wakes him up and like releases him after they have a conversation, and there's like still good Duncan inside, but he's being overwhelmed with like evil Duncan or whatever. And it's not just like normal evil, it's got to be like sadistically like super evil. And I'm like, I feel like he's killed like several of these guys before, and so I don't know, this dark quickening thing is kind of like whatever. Anyway, so the episode rolls out with Duncan like sneaking away and like getting on like a cargo ship headed for jolly old England, so he can meet up with his friend who's like a psychologist immortal, and just being like shady as fuck. And then Joe calls in some like assistance from Mythos, who shows up in the next episode, and I guess his like girlfriend died because she's not around and no one talks about it. So episode 14 picks up with Duncan getting kicked off this ship once they get to England because he was just like a shitty person and caused a lot of problems on the boat and whatnot. He doesn't seem to give any like real fucks about that, to be completely honest. So what was I going to say? Okay. So they beat him up and they toss him off the ship, and then Duncan swears he'll get revenge on this guy, and then he goes and calls his like psychologist buddy, and he has a flashback. So back in the day, like World War II again, there was a lot of like PTSD stuff going on with guys, and Duncan met this psychologist, or this immortal who studied psychology with like Freud and all this stuff, and he was utilizing it in a good way. So Duncan, if you don't remember from World War II, it comes up in like season 2 or 3 or something, where like he, at that point, by the time World War II, he was like done fighting in wars, so he was just being like a medic. And it was when he was fighting Saint Sinclair, or Xavier Sinclair. I think it was Saint Sinclair. Anyway. And so he's still doing that, and he's trying to help people, but then he's having struggles because he's starting to have some like immortal PTSD or whatnot, just from like killing dudes and doing all that crazy shit that they're doing all the time. And so he's talking to this guy, and this guy like helps him out a lot. So he wants to meet with him, but he doesn't want to meet with him because he's also evil. And then we get some more like silly shenanigans where like he finds a boat captain walking around, so he beats him up, and then he takes his wallet out and steals some stuff from him. And like finds out he has like a wife, and so he goes and like seduces the wife and has sex with her, and then the guy comes home and he's gonna like fight that guy again, but then he gets shot, and then Mythos shows up and like drags him off, and then he almost kills Mythos, and then he like wants to meet up with the psychologist, but he doesn't because he's full of evil in his heart and all that shit. And so yeah, it's a lot. What's the other thing? Oh, so that he goes, and the guy tries to like talk him down, the psychologist guy, and then Duncan like kills him, and then Mythos is like no, and then he's about to like kill him, but then he doesn't, and then Mythos like runs away, but then he like gets him again. Oh no, but then Duncan like feels super sad, and he goes back to like his, I guess he has like a art antique place here. He has like a home in London, I guess, because he goes somewhere and he just like trashes the place. And I was like, what the fuck is this place? And he's like looking for something and screaming. And then he goes to like a church and he's like, God, why hast thou forsaken me? Kind of stuff. And like literally in a church. And he's just laying on the ground like, no, it's so bad. It was fun to watch, but I was like, oh, this is so corny. And the Mythos shows up again at the church and is like, give me your sword. I'm going to help you out. And he does. And then they go up to like Scotland, and they go down into like this hole in the ground where there's like a mystical, like a magic pond of green liquid that he gets in there, and Mythos has like his old Highlander sword that his dad gave him, right? And so he goes in there and he like communes with his inner self using like Highlander magic or whatever. It's like little wackadoo stuff. It's so good. And then we have like the traditional, like the guy fighting his shadow self, like from Final Fantasy IV when Cecil's fighting himself, or from fucking like Star Wars when like Luke has to face the dark side, or Link from Adventure of Link fighting his like Shadow Link and stuff. Like it's like time, it's awesome. Like, cause they have a fight, and then like Evil Duncan has like a really deep voice. Like they got somebody totally different to like voice it. Which was fun, and they fight, and that evil Duncan's beating the shit out of good Duncan, and Duncan's like, no, something, and he's like having all these flashbacks, and the psychologist is like, you can do it, you can overcome, and he's like, I can't overcome, and it's like, you can do it, I believe in you, you believe in yourself, you're still good at you, and Mythos is like, I believe in you, there's good at you, and Duncan has like some more like random like little tiny flashbacks about stuff and all that stuff, and with the power of like friendship, because friendship is fucking magic, he's able to like overcome and defeat his evil self, and then he's like standing in the pool like meditating when Mythos comes in, he's like, hey big guy, you doing all right? And he's like, yeah. He's like, you good? And he's like, yeah, I'm good. And it's like, all right, excellent, we did it. And then they head back to like wherever this fucking place was that he tore up. And hey, it's Rachel. You remember Rachel, right? Is she from this season? I think she's from earlier in this season. It's like a hodgepodge of episodes in my head, man. I've watched like over 100 episodes of this shit now. Or not. No, I don't think we've hit 100 yet. We're like right on the verge of hitting 100 because there's like 22 episodes for 3 seasons. That's 60. Oh no. We're not even close. Okay, so let's see that. 66, and then I've watched 14 of these. So 60, 70, we're at 80. This is like episode 80. All right, so we're getting close. We'll hit there next season. But, sorry, I'm a little sick. Anyway, so then, hey, it's Rachel. They like give each other googly eyes. I'm like, yes, he's gonna fuck his like great grandniece. I'm so excited because if anime is taught us anything, incest is the best. I love it. Oh man, Lord. But yeah, that wraps up. I guess that wraps up Evil Duncan arc. We'll see going forward. So we stick with Rachel here for another episode. That's it, though. As the two return to guess where they're going in the second half of a Highlander season. Where is the second half going to take place? That's right, France, Paris. There's got to be some visa issue or something with Adrian Peterson because I'm pretty sure he's French. And they always spend like half the episode here. Maybe they just have some agreement or something. I don't even know if they're even like really in France or they're just like pretending to be in France and everything's filmed in Canada kind of situation, right? Who knows? Not a big deal. But this episode is another one of those like interesting episodes, as in kind of bad, because it deals again with Duncan having like this bizarre sense of honor that ends up causing more harm than good. And it's like, that would be okay if he was like a shonen anime protag in like the first arc or two. But this is like a 400-year-old immortal who's been through like many lifetimes of experience. And he's still doing like dumb shit that doesn't make any fucking sense. And then at the end, it just like gets all thrown out the window anyway. Like... Like it's like this might be one of the dumbest episodes of the entire Highlander franchise. Like, no joke. It was kind of frustrating to watch. So Rachel and Duncan are just chillaxing in Paris, hanging out, yada yada yada, doing stuff at the barge. There's no Maurice, unfortunately. I think in this season, I think he's gone, which makes me sad because he was some of the best parts of the French arcs. But they see Duncan senses something and then sees a guy about to be killed, so he rushes over and like saves his life. And this guy ends up being like the king of some like Middle Eastern, North African country of some sort, and he's kind of a terrible dictator. And one of his like associates, or not even associates, chancellors or counselors or somebody else that's kind of like around, is this Kasim guy. And so who's Kasim? Kasim's an immortal that Duncan met in like the 1700s. And what was going on with that whole situation? So Duncan's like traveling around and he meets this guy who's like a cobbler or something. Like he makes boots. And the guy's like running away from something, and Duncan and him like become friends out in the desert. And then they get like caught by like the king of like this country then. And the guy apparently was trying to like flirt with, or he had sex with the princess or the sultana, right? Because it's not a princess and like a caliph or like a sultanate or whatever. Like the area, there's no kings in the area of the world that this clearly is taking place in. So there's another name for it, but whatever. So the princess, and so he must die. And so then Duncan goes to like rescue him, and then Kasim like catches him. Kasim's like sworn his oath to like always help like the king's family forever, even if like 1,000 years go by, he'll always ensure. And the king kind of figured out that he was not like everything he says he is, so he's like an immortal. And then Kasim is the most honorable person because he literally does. And so then he goes to like kill the bootmaker, and then because he's Duncan's friends, Duncan's like, there's got to be another way. Let me do something. And he's like, and then Duncan ends up swearing an oath that he can call upon his sword for like a favor at any point, and then Duncan has to go through with it. And they're like, cool. So in the modern era, Duncan finds out that Kasim is actually the one who is trying to kill this king, and he's the one who like is setting up the assassinations, and that like there's a guy who's like the last heir of this king he swore loyalty to all those hundreds of years ago, like 200 and some odd years ago, 250 years or something. And so he's the current king is like a complete tyrant. He just like treats people poorly and like overtaxes people and overburdens. And like if he can get killed, then this other guy can become king and everything will be great, and he'll fulfill his like lifelong promise and whatnot. And so Duncan's like, what does that have to do with me? And it's like, well, you foiled the assassination attempt. And he's like, well, yeah, I don't know what's going on. And he's like, well, no, so you owe me, so you're gonna assassinate the king instead. And Duncan's like, I can't do that. And I'm like immediately like, what? And then
because he's not gonna like pass judgment. Kasim's like, you're not passing judgment. You literally owe me a favor. Like you swore an oath, and so go do your oath. And I feel like there's an episode. In fact, I distinctly remember there's an episode where he swore not to kill somebody, and then he was just like YOLO and killed them anyway, or whatever. And that made like a little bit more sense because there was like this guy was like killing somebody or hurting people that Duncan like cared about, or it still was kind of like you're an oath breaker. You're like worse than a lot of these evil guys because at least you like know where they're coming from. But for you, it's like people are gonna make oaths with you and then you're just gonna break them later. Like what the fuck, man? Like that's like the least honorable thing you can do. Like this whole shtick you have about being honorable and not killing people and stuff is like total bullshit. When you're just gonna like let people die because of your inaction, and then you're gonna like just break oaths when you like feel like it, right? So that's why this is like the stupidest episode ever. Like I would say if I could get rid of any episode, it would be this episode because it like destroys so much of like Duncan's like goodwill that he's built up over 4 seasons of being like a good guy and doing what's right and like overcoming his dark side to just be like, nah, I'm an oathbreaker, fuck you, and do what I want. And he does this because he goes and like he meets like the guy who's supposed to take over as king, and he's generally like a great person, and then he goes to talk to the king, and essentially he's like, I'm here to kill you, but I won't kill you if you promise not to hurt this other guy. And then the king's like, okay, I promise. He's also an oathbreaker, so it's 2 oathbreakers making like a deal together. And so of course the guy like kills him, and Kasim is like livid because and Duncan tries to like justify it, and then like Rachel at some point like tries to help him justify it. So she's terrible. She's like a bad girlfriend, right? Because they're definitely blinking at this point. Like she's real bad. And so Kasim does like the correct thing is he like kidnaps her and it's like, hey, you're gonna take away like this person I swore loyalty to. You're gonna get one of mine, I'm gonna get one of yours. Like that's how this fucking works, you asshole. Like because of you, specifically because of you, and you're like kind of going to like assassin. If you just like done nothing, then this other guy wouldn't have been killed. But because he kind of half-assedly did something. Anyway, so it really kind of bothers me, this whole thing. So anyway, so Kasim kidnaps Rachel and like trashes the barge, and then Duncan gets super mad because he feels guilty for being an oathbreaker. And he feels bad because he's an asshole. And he's like, how dare you? And it's like, dude, you motherfucking did this to this guy. Anyway, it's too much. I don't want to spend so much time on this fucking stupid bullshit. So they fight, and Duncan wins, of course, and then he lets Kasim go. And Kasim's like, do the honorable thing and kill me, you asshole. And Duncan's like, I refuse to be honorable. I'm an oathbreaker. And the guy's like, fuck you. And then he goes off and like finds Rachel. And then Rachel's like, oh, I love boinking you and stuff, but I have a higher calling. And that calling is to go in the middle of nowhere, Highland, and like keep the memory alive or something. And so she dopes out of there, leaving Duncan to clean up the mess. And it's like, okay, this episode sucked. Episode 16 is a much better episode. I was going to say return to form because you hear that so fucking much. It's so cringe, too. Like, the fuck people saying that shit for? What a bunch of dumbasses. Like, if you hear the words return to form, then you know you're talking to somebody or listening to somebody who is, like, not of the most high caliber of intelligence, unless they're using it sarcastically. Anyway, this episode is, it's much more of a banger. I'm still pissed off with the previous episode. I'm not going to lie. It's like, that episode was so disappointing. It was like, man, if this had been in the first season, I would have never like continued watching this show. Like, fuck that. But, you know, I just got to like take a breath and let it go because this episode's much better. It involves a lot of mythos and Amanda. And hey, you remember the Stones? You remember the Stones, right? I talked about that, I don't know, last season. So the stones, what are the stones? So there's like the Stones. I don't know what they're called. The episode's called like Methuselah's Gift, so I'm going to assume they're called the Methuselah Stones. Methuselah, if you're not familiar with like Christianity, is like this ancient immortal, or not ancient immortal. He's like an ancient son of like Adam, or great-grandson, or great-great-grandson. If you pull out like Genesis, you'll see it. And he's like the longest living person in recorded history. If you're like of the Judeo-Christian faith and you believe all that stuff's historical, which I do. But so it's like, oh, you get Methuselah used a lot. Like, these in a Vampire the Masquerade too as a term for like the oldest like immortals after like Cain and stuff. So it's a term that has a lot of ingrained stuff in like society, at least in like the West, as like maybe not that term exactly, but the concept of like these old living, these ancient, like it has a lot of like connotations. Anyway, so what's the deal with this gem? So if you can gather all the Methuselah shards, apparently you can like get powers, or you can grant like true immortality, or you can grant immortality to like a mortal or something. And a lot of people believe in this, quite frankly, like complete mythology, including Amanda, and then her, I think her name is Rachel or Rebecca, I can't remember, the person who trained her. And then Mythos has some concerns about it. The Watchers like know about it, and they like are thinking about it. There's that
Luther guy, I'm pretty sure his name was, who was trying to gather them all that Amanda had almost died too, and then Duncan like killed the shit out of him. Right. So there's a lot of people who are like banding about trying to find this shit. And Amanda has a slice, and the Watchers have a slice, and there's slices all around. Anyway, so this episode kind of bounces around a lot between Mythos. So Mythos is trying to get the gems put together for his girlfriend who's dying of cancer, and we find out that she's like in hospital at this point. So maybe that's why she wasn't around before. I mean, she's not around because I don't want to pay that actress anymore. But per the lore of the story, she's not around because she's in the hospital. And then Amanda is being chased for it. Like the episode starts off with her like just chilling in like France somewhere, and then these guys like busting her place trying to shoot her up, and this guy has a sword like they're gonna cut off her head, and she's like ruh-roh. And so she goes and finds Duncan, who's now in France, and she's got like a cute new hairstyle. Well, it's still like that kind of like short pixie cut kind of situation because that's like the thing she does, even though it doesn't look good on anybody. But it's now dyed white, so she can kind of keep a low profile so guys can't find her as well, right? So, am I recording? Yes, I am. Okay. Sorry. So then we find out that it's the Watchers, and there's like the head of the Watchers or somebody, because there's some guy who keeps pestering Mythos who's like, I'm your boss, and Mythos is like, roger that, sir. And then eventually that guy figures out that Mythos is Mythos, not like Adam Stephenson or whatever his fucking name he's going by, and that he's an immortal. And then they have a conversation about the whole reason that guy joined the Watchers in the first place was because of the stones or something, which I don't know how he found out about it without being a Watcher, but something. Anyway, hand wave it away. So he wants the stones like real bad so he can be immortal and something, and then they want to get it from Amanda, and then Amanda thinks Mythos is sending the Watchers after him because she kind of knows like his deal, and then Mythos is like, no, I'm just trying to get it for my girlfriend, and then they fight at some point, but then they stop fighting. And like I think Mythos almost beats Amanda and whatnot. We get some flashbacks of Amanda talking about the stone and stuff with like her mom / the one who raised her in immortality, right? Back in like the 1200s or whatever. And then you don't get any flashbacks of Duncan, really. So it's really like an Amanda-centered episode. It really is like an Amanda-centered episode now that I'm thinking about it, because like Duncan like barely plays a role. Like he comes in to be like a mediator and like a peacemaker between them, but it really focuses on Mythos and Amanda going back and forth. And eventually everything comes to head, and Duncan has to like interrupt them from fighting and save them, because part of like the Watchers, the head Watcher guy, he's like tricking them into like fighting so that he can kill them both and take it, and then he can get immortality. And Duncan like intercedes, and then they give the guy all the stones, and they put them together, and it does like shit all. And then they're disappointed, and so a bunch of them get killed, I think, or wander off. And then Mythos and Amanda kind of make like frenemies again. they make peace, so they're not like fighting anymore or whatever. And then it's like, all right, well, that's unfortunate. And then Mythos leaves with like the crystal that does nothing to be sad with his girlfriend, and that wraps up episode 16. The next episode continues the sort of like downward trajectory of the season. Like the season was so hyped for the first half, but something about the second half just is kind of like these episodes, I don't know, they're just not as good. So this one focuses on a new immortal named Danny, some Italian name, Chiamoli or something like that. Anyway, he doesn't look Italian at all, so it's kind of offensive to me. Anyway, so Duncan and Amanda so we start off with Danny. He's just like living his best life, trying to be a magician. His mom's giving him a hard time. His dad's like dead or something, and so he like gets into a fight with his mom, and then he runs out of the house and gets hit by a truck and dies. But instead of being isekai'd to a fantasy universe, he just wakes the fuck back up, and he's like, ta-da! And then we switch over to Duncan and Amanda, who are visiting like a circus, and I think the guy who runs the circus is like an old friend of Amanda's or something. Anyway, so they watch this show, and part of the show is that they take a gun and shoot this Danny, and then he just like pops back up, and he's like, ta-da! And everyone's like, oh, great, magnificent, or whatever, magnifique, because they're still in Paris. Even though Danny and his mom are like super British looking, and she's got like an English accent. Anyway, so they go to like talk to this guy afterwards about how he's an immortal and how they're immortals, and he's like, oh, I don't know anything about that. And they're like, well, you got to do sword stuff and all this other stuff. And he's like, I just want to be a magician. Leave me alone. And then Duncan is like very concerned, and Amanda's like, what's your problem? And then we get a flashback to like a similar situation where Duncan had found this guy and was trying to like help him, learn how to sword fight and do all this stuff. And then over the course of time, what happens is this guy gets like challenged by another immortal named Case, and then Case kind of goes around and like cleanses the earth of like. Well, that's the thing. He makes it. There's a lot of kind of like religious connotations to what this guy's doing. Like it's almost like he's purifying the land, but in reality, he's just like, well, someone's got to kill him, so it might as well be me, kind of attitude. And it's like that's fair. And then him and Duncan get into it back in the day, and Duncan's like, what you're doing, and he's like, and the guy's like, what am I doing that's so wrong? And he's like, I guess nothing, because it's just like you're an immortal. He's like fighting other immortals, or they're just taking their head, especially if they're like ill prepared. Like he's just being like very pragmatic about the situation. Like, oh, if I can kill this guy before he like learns how to sword fight, that's like good for me, and I get like a little bit more strength or quickening or whatever. Anyway, so eventually he gets this guy to like he like gets this kid, and he like fights him, and the guy's like obviously not ill prepared, and this is like the kid Duncan's trying to like raise up. And so then he cuts his head off, and then Duncan gets like super upset about the whole situation and wants to challenge him. And they're like, this guy always goes and like prays in a sanctuary afterwards, because again, it's like there's like connotations that he's doing this for like a holy reason or something. But I think he's just an asshole. Anyway, but he's not like a bad guy. He's just like an immortal doing immortal stuff. And then Duncan's like, I want to fight you. And the guy's like, sure. And so, like, absolutely. Like, that's the whole point. Like, we're immortals. We're immortals, and we kill our immortals, and there can be only one. And, like again, he's not an asshole about it. He's just like, this is just, that's what it is. That's, and so Duncan has, like, some kind of respect for him, because it's like, well, that's a good point. I guess we are just immortals at the end of the day, if that's how you choose to live. But he's like, no, I want to fight you now. And the guy's like, sure, let's fight. And then I think Duncan didn't show up because this guy would have beaten him or something, and he's kind of a coward. Again, it's one of these things where it's like Duncan being super sketchy based on, it's like a totally different, like a change of character and like the way he acts in certain situations. And I guess you could say it's part of like the evilness that took over, like the evil quickening or whatever, stupid bullshit. But I don't know. Ever since the evil quickening, the episodes have just not been as high quality, I would say. Okay. Which is, it's jarring, because it's like, these are like this is like first season level quality of shows, and like the writing and like tone and stuff, and kind of like how they're just kind of all over the place. Where I've come accustomed to like the second half of season 1 to like the first half of this fourth season. So like 3 whole seasons of like slowly getting like higher quality, just like episodes and like the writing department and everything, and just slowly getting better to like this huge drop off, and it's like very jarring. Not the episodes are like bad per se. It's just like I'm far less interested in like this random bullshit story. Anyway, there was that one episode that was god awful, but other than that, okay. So then he doesn't show up, and then so now, but Case is back. This guy is he's refusing to learn how to sword fight. He still doesn't need to. It's not a big deal. And then he'll just like carry a gun or something. And then he runs into Case, like shows up, and he's like, "Aha, I'm gonna kill you." And then he's like, other circus people are around. He's like, I'll get you later. And the guy's like, all right. That guy showed up, and Duncan's like, let me teach you how to fight. And he's like, no, I don't want to do that. I'm just going to run away. It's like, okay. Anyway, and so then Duncan's like, I gotta go take care of this motherfucker and get revenge, because I never went back. And so then he tracks him down. And meanwhile, there's like a side plot with like Amanda, where she's just doing like she's doing nothing. She's just hanging out, and the guy's like, oh, Amanda, it's been so long. You should do this. I got this show in Moscow, and you should do it. I'll pay you all this money. And she's trying to get Duncan to go with her, because it's all this money to like go do this performance in Moscow with, I don't know. It's like and Duncan's like, no, absolutely not. And then Duncan ends up fighting and killing Case. And then he wants to help Danny, and Danny's like, nope, I got a gig in Vegas. I'm going there. So then it's like a short time later, he's in Vegas, and he's after a show, and he's all this money, and he's got like a cell phone in like the 90s, which is very impressive, and all this stuff. And he's talking to his mom about how he's made all this money and how happy he is. And then this immortal like shows up while he's getting in like his car, and just like fucking murders him, because he has no way to defend himself. So wah wah wah. And that's not the end of the episode. The episode is like also meanwhile in like Moscow, Duncan and Amanda are like doing this ridiculous show, and they're wearing like these bright white like circus outfits, kind of like the Tiger guys, the Siegfried and Roy, maybe. Anyway, or they were lovers. I don't know. Anyway, the Tiger guys from like the circus back in the day. You can look it up. And they're doing like all this stuff, and Duncan looks very perplexed by the whole thing, and so does Amanda. And I'm just like, the fuck. And then that's it. That's the end of the episode. And if you think we're going to stay in Moscow, you're absolutely wrong. We're just back to Paris, and Amanda's gone. This is what I mean by the episodes are kind of jarring. Like, there's not like these episodes almost seem like they just like filmed a bunch of stuff and just like threw it in there, and it was like, here you go. We don't have like a cohesive plot or like a main villain or anything. It's just kind of like completely random. Okay, so then the next episode so the next episode we start off, which again is like a jarring thing to do. We start off in a cemetery, and Mythos and Duncan are just like standing there, and then Mythos is talking about his girlfriend who apparently died of cancer and how sad it is and stuff, and how he's upset about the whole situation. And then it's just like, okay, well, enough of that. So they're walking out of the graveyard, and then they both like, you know, they get like the done where they like notice there's an immortal around, and then Duncan goes to like track this guy down, and he finds this dude, and this dude is what is this dude's name? Cochrane. This dude's Cochrane, and they're like fighting. So then the guy, he's like Cochrane, or he doesn't call him Cochrane, calls him by his first name. I don't think I wrote down the first name. Let's see, Warren Cochrane. Yeah, I did. Okay, so Warren, he's like, Warren, and the guy's like, I don't know who you are, and he like runs off, and Duncan's like, the fuck. Anyway. And so we go back in time, and there was like a whole Jacobite. So the Jacobites are if you're familiar with like French history and the French Revolution, the Jacobites come up a lot. There was also like a similar kind of like of the people revolution that was going on in Scotland around the same time with the Jacobites. I think they were far less successful. Like the king like put his foot down on that. And so this episode is kind of like a mind trip because Warren has like amnesia, and there's a whole thing. So we get like the whole flashback with like Duncan, and there's like a story, and then we get a flashback with like Warren telling like his current wife about like stuff that's going on, or like someone recalling. Anyway, we find out that like Warren has like, he was so guilty about like betraying the Jacobites to like some noble, or betraying the noble to the Jacobites or something. I was kind of confused about who was what. This episode was like kind of hard to follow, so it just wasn't written as well. And so did I write down exactly what was going on? Duncan. Oh yeah, so in the modern day, Duncan keeps running into this guy, and he keeps trying to get him to remember. There's no other immortals, so there's no threat with that. So on that aspect, it's kind of boring. And the guy keeps no, and then he like, there's like jail, and there's like a dead guy, or like how we found this guy, and he's like married to this woman, and she like doesn't know shit about anything that's going on except that like he has this thing. And then we find out that there's like this amnesia is very specific to like this event where he has this total, like Duncan keeps trying to get him to remember what happened back in the day and their friendship, and then eventually he does, but he remembers it like incorrectly, and then Duncan corrects him, and then he like realizes it for good, and then like he becomes like very unstable, and they like fight, but then Duncan like refuses to kill him or whatever, and then there's a lot of conversation with Mythos and him about like memory and like living so long and like shit that goes on, and it's much more about like the trauma that this guy faced and how he like psychologically blocked out like what occurred because it was like too jarring for him to like when he like betrayed somebody. I don't know, really. Like, again, I took some notes, but I'm reading the notes, and I'm like, I don't remember some of this stuff. Like, I kind of checked out of this episode a little bit while I was, like, on, because it was so boring. Which, again, is kind of the problem with some of these episodes in the second half. Like, I don't care so much about, like, what's going on. Because it's, like, there's less, it's just the stakes aren't there, it seems. Like, it's like this one and the previous one, and the one before that, which was like highly offensive, because it's like, so Duncan's like a twice Oathbreaker now. Like, okay, I guess that's cool. That kind of pushes me out of like my interest in a lot of stuff that's going on. So I'm sure it'll recover. We got like 2 more seasons of this plus whatever's left of this, so I think it'll be okay. But yeah. Oh, and there's also kind of like this subplot where like Warren Cochrane has like, he's like a teacher or something, and it's not like an immortal, it's like a human teacher. He's trying to teach him about like socialist principles or Jacobite principles. He's still got like kind of the same thing going, but like he betrayed them in the past, and like, I don't know. So that's like causing part of the problem, like something about teaching a student, and then like it seemed at some point like his student was going to be under threat of like violence or something, but then like nothing came of that, it seems, or like he was going to hurt his own student. Anyway, and then Mythos is just kind of there to be like, oh yeah, his girlfriend's dead, he's back. And also he's just kind of help Duncan deal with like helping this guy navigate his like a guilt in his memory and whatnot. And then after the fight, him and Mythos just kind of like hang out and talk about being immortal. The end. All right, so episode 19 is much better than the last couple episodes. It focuses on this immortal named Morgan Estrange or something. He's a French guy who died. He was like adopted by this baron. They're not called barons in France. But anyway, he was adopted by this nobleman in France because the guy didn't have an heir. Then he had an heir, and then at some point he gets told that his little brother is going to take over the estate, even though he was like officially adopted, and they're going to give him like an allowance or whatnot. And so the guy's pretty pissed off about it. So he goes to like kill his little brother, and he does. And then he gets like caught by the rest of the family or something, and he gets like killed and then buried. And then he wakes up, and who's there to welcome him? That's right. Xavier St. Clair. So Xavier St. Clair, hey, it's that guy again. He's back. I love it. He's dead, but this is like in the past. So then they do this whole thing where he goes to like kill his parents, and Xavier stops him and is like, this is like during some sort of like French and English war of some sort, because the British are coming, like the Redcoats are coming. And so he's like, hey, like the revolution took your titles, the Napoleon took your land, and now the British are here to take the rest. Like, I'll let you live, but you got to show me, you got to tell me where all like your getaway bag is, essentially. The guy's like, I have no such thing. And he's like, all right, well, I know how to torture people. And he's like, you can torture me all you want. He's like, I'm not torturing you. And this is like classic Xavier, one of the best villains in this series. He's like, I'm not here to torture you, I'm here to torture them. And he points at like the daughter, and the guy's like, all right, it's over there behind the wine. And so he's like, thanks. And he's like, let's drink as gentlemen before we depart. And the guy's like, all right, yes, I'll always drink, I'm French. And so they drink, and then him and Morgan leave, and Morgan's like super pissed off. He's like, you didn't do anything, I was gonna kill those guys, I was gonna get my revenge because they killed me, and yada yada yada. And Xavier's like, they're dead, bro. And he's like, what? He's like, I poisoned the wine. Lesson number 1. Like, don't dirty your hands if you don't need to. And he's like, oh. And then they're walking off, and then Morgan's like, wait, are you gonna kill me someday? And then are you gonna betray me someday or something? And then Xavier like gives his like sweet aspirin, and he's like that'll be lesson number 2. And then Morgan's like, oh, I see, very good. So the reason all this is coming up is because in the modern day there was a jewel robbery that was almost exactly the same as when Xavier first showed up and robbed that jewelry store using like gas that killed everybody but him. Right, and so Duncan's in France just hanging out, and he gets pulled in by the French police to talk to the French police captain, who is like trying to investigate this thing, and his name came up in like when they were investigating like other people that may have been related to the previous case. And then guess who else shows up? Dun dun dun! It's Renee Delaney. That's right. You might have no idea who that is. She was, I think it was season 1 or 2. Well, anyway, there was like a 2-parter where so there's a 2-parter where Xavier got killed, and she was like involved in like America, and then she came over to France to help like, and then they were like lovers at that time. So it's got to be the end of season 2, because Tessa doesn't die till the beginning of season 1 or season 2. So yeah, so probably at the end of season 2. And so she's back, and she's got short hair, and her and Duncan still have like googly eyes towards each other, but she can't do anything with Duncan anymore because she's engaged to a nice young man who works in DC and is running for senator or something. Like, okay. Anyway, so Duncan like bumps into Morgan, and he recognizes him because back in the day when Morgan first became an immortal, he ran into Xavier and him, and then, so he saw them, and like he didn't do anything, obviously, because there was like a war going on, and they couldn't just like duel it right there. And at the time, he didn't have any like personal grievances necessarily with Xavier. I mean, he did, historically speaking, because Xavier killed like his homie in like Arabia or whatever. But I mean, mortals kill each other all the time, so it's not necessarily he's holding like a personal grudge against Xavier. He's just like, this jerk off again. And so then it kind of the flashbacks kind of coincide with stuff that the Morgan's doing now. So we get flashbacks like Duncan dealing with Xavier and Duncan dealing with Renee, and then we also get the flashbacks of like Morgan's like history, so you understand where he's coming from. And he's like a mini Xavier that's not as good of a fighter or as clever or anything. But him and Duncan keep trying to fight, but then Renee like breaks in at some point, and so they stop fighting, pretend they were just like arguing, and then they arrest Morgan, and then Morgan like kills himself, quote unquote, and then escapes the morgue. And then the whole time, and it's at some point he poisons Renee and the French detective while Duncan is having like dinner with them, and then Duncan like is able to stop Renee from drinking the poison, but the French detective guy dies. So Duncan's like got a real hard on for killing this guy at this point. So eventually they, Morgan disappears, and then Renee is like, all right, well, the case is closed, the guy's dead, I'm going to go back to DC. And then Duncan's like walking her home, and then he senses Morgan, so he's like, I'm going to come up with you. And she's like, oh no, we couldn't possibly do that. What about my fiance? And Duncan's like, yeah, it's just professional, don't worry about it. Which it is, actually, because he doesn't want her to die. So they go up there and they're like chit-chatting, and then Duncan like gets, like notices Morgan, or like goes and looks for him or whatever. And then Renee's like getting undressed, so we get some nice shots of that. And then she's like, oh, I really shouldn't be doing this. And like, I know there's something between us. And like that thing that Morgan said about like us still having like feelings for each other is true. And I just feel like I have to sleep with you to get closure. And it's like typical woman behavior, man. Typical women behavior. Oh, I must cheat on my fiance just to prove that I actually truly love him. It's like, okay. Stupid. So the fight is pretty fun too. It's not like super fun. It's in like the actual fighting, but this guy, this sneakopotamus fella, he ends up poisoning. Like Morgan ends up poisoning Duncan, and then it's like, haha, in 30 seconds you'll be dead, and then I can just cut off your head. And then so they start fighting instead of just like, I don't know, running away. But Duncan's like, that's all the time I need, and so he ends up killing him. And then like falling off the building onto like another building right before at the end of that, and then he gets like the quickening and wakes up later, and then him and Renee have like, a little thing. I don't think they fuck. Didn't seem like that. And then she's gonna head back, and he's like, oh well, maybe different things and different times would have been different things. But yeah, it was pretty good. It wasn't as banger as like a lot of these episodes in the first half, but it was pretty good. Like it's back to like, it's like a monster of the week, but it's like a well done. The characters are interesting. Anytime Xavier shows up, it's like a good time by all. Like, so whoever's writing the Xavier episodes, like he's excellent. Whatever he or she ended up going to do, I'm sure they were very successful. The last few episodes have been kind of like a disappointment. I mean, the last episode's all right, but I was kind of surprised. This episode again, episode number 20 here. We're getting to the end of season 4. Excellent. So this whole episode really focuses around Robert and Angelina. And Robert and Angelina are immortal married couple who have been together for like 300 years. So we spend most of the episode actually in like the kind of flashback about how they met, about their relationship, about stuff that's been going on, and then kind of how it relates to the present. And right now we have Mythos. He has no place to live. The place he was staying, he got like kicked out of or something. And so he's crashing kind of with Duncan on the barge and talking about how they should be roommates. And Duncan's like, no. And then Duncan gets like a letter, I can't remember. I think he gets a letter and he's like thinking. And then, so we go to the past. We go 30 years in the past, like kind of, it's like, I want to say the 1600s. Yeah, like late 1600s. I can't remember exactly when it came up. Anyway, so he's hanging out with Fitz. Hey, Fitz is back. You remember that guy? He's dead now in the present, but in the past he's still alive. So him and Fitz are fighting over this girl, Angelina, who's an immortal, and they're like wandering around, and then at some point they get to like this huge palace, and she's like, oh, this baron who lives in that palace stole some gold from me or something, and like, well, let's go get him. And so they head on in, and the guy's immortal, and this is Robert, and as soon as Angelina and Robert like get eye to eye with each other, they like instantly are like madly in love. And so Duncan's about to tries to fight Robert, but then he keeps like talking to Angelina while they're doing that, and so the guy's not taking it that seriously. And then eventually they go off to like talk about the issue at hand, and then we go to like a year later or like shortly thereafter, they have their wedding, and then they're both gonna like give her away, because there's a whole thing where they're like, a lot of it's just like him and Fitz talking about like, oh, she loves me more, blah 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 blah. And then she falls in love with this guy, and she sends them both a note to meet her at this place and is like, hey, I need to talk to you guys. It's very important. And they're like, oh, she's going to propose marriage. And they're like, no, propose marriage to me. That's why I'm here, so she can let you down softly. She comes out, and they're like, oh, is this about marriage? And she's like, how'd you guess? I want you both to give me away to Robert. And they're like, well. And so they both kind of like accept the fact that she and Robert are like madly in love, even though they both love her, and, that whole business. And then like 100 years later, they're having like their wedding anniversary, and there's just some like more fun shenanigans going on between the two of them, talking about their relationship, talking about how they thought it would last like a month or two, but they've been together for like 100 years. And, they're all like kind of close friends now at this juncture. And then while they're like preparing for like the wedding for their anniversary, because they're going to have another wedding, because it's been 100 years, right? So they have like new acquaintances and stuff. And, they got to like, immortals can't just like be chilling. They got to like reinvent themselves. We find out that the French Revolution's like going on, and then there's some concerns, but she's like, oh no, Robin and I have ingratiated ourselves to the revolution, we'll be fine. And if you know anything about the French Revolution, that is the worst, worst idea. And so apparently we get word that Robert was jumped by some revolutionaries, and he was dragged off to meet with Madame Guillotine. And so they're like, ruh-roh. Because, if it's just like a firing squad, that's like cool, but like a guillotine cuts off your head. And like, there's a whole funny conversation with Fitz about how it's like scientifically proven that the guillotine is the most humane way to like execute your nobles that you hate.
Which I guess is fair. It actually is. Like, you just sever the head and you're dead. Like, it's not like these injections, which are like humane, which are actually not. The firing squad is actually super humane too. You just get guys to like shoot them right in the head, because once that brain goes done, like, you're done. There's no pain. Okay. And so they execute like a rescue. The three of them, like, Angelina dresses up like a boy, and then they go and they rescue Robert, and Duncan and Fritz cause like a commotion, and they all meet up, and then Duncan and Fritz see them making out, and they're like, all right, we did a good thing here. So I think that's all the past stuff. And so now we're forward 300 years, and the episode actually starts off with this woman just lying in bed, and then this guy coming with like a fucking bandito mask from like a 1970s cowboy movie, and then they like sword fight, and then they fuck, right? And you're like, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. So Duncan's like, oh, I should visit these guys. I haven't seen them in a while. So he heads on over to their place, and we see them like fighting because they're having like another, like, their third marriage anniversary or 100-year marriage anniversary or whatever. And so they're setting it up, and Angelina's just like screaming at Robert and telling him everything he does is wrong and bad and yada yada yada. And then like Duncan shows up and she smashes like a Ming vase, which is like there's only like 7 of those in the world. So he's like, no, my vase. And so then they have a little chit chat. So then Robert and Duncan are chit-chatting a bit later, and he's explaining that things have been kind of crazy since like the 60s, I think. They're just like fighting all the time. She's always complaining about stuff, like nothing's ever right, whatever. And then they have like more conversations about, like, Robert's like, yeah, it's all her fault. And Duncan's like, really, bro? And he's like, all right, I could probably do better. And so then he meets up with her and they talk, and then she's like, I want a divorce, and she storms off. And so Duncan tries to go mediate that, but she's like, no, blah, 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 something, something. And she tries to like flirt with him, and Duncan's like, no. Like, hold up, wait a minute, you had your chance. You and this guy are like madly in love, just be with him. And she's like, no, I don't want to. And so then Robert and him come up with this like cockamamie scheme where they're going to get Robert in a situation where he's about to die to kind of convince her that she really does love him and they should be together, right? It's like some stupid romantic comedy stuff. Well, he's immortal, so like whatever, he gets like stabbed in the chest. And so they're like, well, it can't be Duncan, so we got to like find an immortal who's going to like play along but not actually try to kill this guy when he has the opportunity. All right, so who could it possibly be? Mythos. That's right, Mythos is in the episode. And so Duncan proposes it to Mythos, and he's like, that's a terrible idea. You should never get in the middle of like a married couple. They're like fucking insane. And and then Duncan's like, come on. And then Mythos is like, if you give me your barge, I'll do it. And Duncan's like, yeah, sure, whatever. And so Mythos he doesn't know these people from like Adam, right? So he goes and he meets up with Robert, and they like have a nice little chit chat and like game plan. And then Duncan goes and gets Angelina, and it's like, oh no, he's fighting an immortal, and so one of these immortals, young immortal, he might beat him, Robert, and yada yada yada. And so she's like freaking out, and it's like, no, right? Puts fear of God in her and whatnot. And so they race over there, and then Mythos and Robert like play fight, but they it's like realistic, but then they have an action, and then Mythos like stabs him in the chest, and then Angelina like freaks the fuck out and like races at Mythos to like cut his head off or fight him to protect her man, right? Which is like against mortal rules, but she's fucking crazy. And so the Mythos like runs off, and Duncan like quote unquote chases after him. I was doing air quotes in real life. I don't know why. It's like I knew that. Anyway, and then it's like all good, and then they like get back together and they go fuck. Excellent. And so Duncan is back at his place, and Mythos is like, give me the keys. And Duncan's like, I thought you were joking. And Mythos is like, get the fuck out of here. He's like, I still don't like this. Like, I can't go out. She's like sworn vengeance on me, and like she's gonna hunt me down. And like I've been alive for 5,000 years by not interfering with like people's fucking relationships. And Duncan's like, oh no, man, it'll be fine. Just like hang out. They're gonna go on a honeymoon soon, and then like YOLO. And he's like, all right, whatever. So then Duncan finally gives him the barge, and he's like sour bottoms about it. So then he goes to hang out with like Robert, and they're like drinking and chit chatting, and it's like, how's it going? And Robert's like, oh, we had a big fight. And Duncan's like, Jesus Christ, about what? And it's like, where are you either gonna like walk her down the aisle or you're gonna be the best man, right? And it's like, that's poetious. and he's like, I literally don't give a fuck what you do. And then it's like, where is she now? And Robert's like, oh, she went to go talk to your barge. And he's like, oh, Lord Christ. And so he grabs Robert, and they race over to the barge. And then at the barge, Mythos hears like the door open. He's like, hello? Because he senses immortals, and it's her. And she's like, I'm going to kill you, motherfucker. And he's like, wait, it's not what you think. And he like grabs the sword, and then like we fade away. And then Duncan and Robert like roll up, and then they sense an immortal, and then Angelina's walking up the barge with her sword, and she's like, sorry, it's a huge mess down there. And Duncan's like, no, Jesus Christ, like, it was all a joke, blah, blah, blah. And it was like pretend play acting, and she's like, aha! And then Mythos like pops out of the back, and he's like, aha, I told you! Fucking awesome. And then Duncan's like, wah, wah, wah. And then Robert and Angelina, they like, you asshole, something, something, and then they make out, and then they head off. And then a bit later, Duncan and Mythos are like hanging out, and Duncan's like making a mess because it's not his barge anymore, so fuck the guy. Essentially, Jesus. And then And so Mythos is like, hey, man, like, cut it out. And then Duncan's like making a mess because he got a mean vase. There's only 6 of these left in the world or something. And they're like chatting about it. And that's his present. And then Duncan's like, what are you going to give him for their like wedding gift? And he's like, I think I'm going to give him the barge. And Duncan's like, what? And like the Ming vase like slips out of his hands and smashes on the ground. And then Mythos is like, just kidding. JK, I'm going to give him a toaster. And Duncan's like, wow. And Mythos hands him a fucking broom and walks out. Fucking excellent. So we're going to finish this season with a 2-parter, as we do with these with Highlander. The first part is called Judgment Day, and we start off with Joe, and he gets a call, and the call is telling him that dun dun dun, Duncan MacLeod is dead. No, he's not really dead. So Duncan shows up to Ferris to finish his record or whatever, and he's kind of sad upon this. And then we see Duncan just like jogging along the river, whatever's river's there. I know there's like 4 rivers in France. I just can't remember, or in Paris, I can't remember what they're all called. But he's jogging along, and then he's like, Joe, and Joe's like, Nani desu ka? And then some dudes roll up, knock Joe out, and drag him away in a car. So Duncan calls on Mythos and is like, yo, bro, what's up? And Mythos is like, I don't know anything about this. So they look into it, and they find out that Joe has been grabbed because it's time for him to be judged for breaking his oath to the Watchers, which is fair. He has. But the likely consequence is not like excommunication, it's death. Dun, dun, dun. Meanwhile, we see this dude looking for Duncan MacLeod, clearly. He's like looking into his barge and stuff. And then there's other guy also headed over to the barge, and he sees this guy, and he like smokes and turns away or whatnot. So Duncan is able to like track down where the Watchers are like hanging out for this trial business or whatnot, and so Joe's like just hanging out, like reading a book and sassing these guys, and the guy who's like running this Inquisition is this guy called Jack, who I don't know if we've met him before, but he's friends with Joe somewhat. Anyway. So Duncan breaks in, beats some dudes up, and is like, all right, Joe, let's get out of here. And Joe's like, no, man, I'm here for a crime. And then they drag Joe out and start yelling at him, and then Duncan comes in, and then it's like a lot of what do you call these episodes? It's like a flashback episode. So, but like, I mean, they're all flashback episodes, but it's flashback to actual episodes. So we see when like Joe and him met, how Duncan like, found the book that Darius had and about Horton, and we learn about, what's his name? Caius or Callus or whatever, and like the thing with the Eiffel Tower, and how he was going to release the documents that were going to like show the whole world everything about the Immortals and the Watchers and everything. And Duncan keeps being like, they're like, Joe broke his oath and didn't like do this thing correctly, and Duncan's like, if he had done that, we'd all be dead, or we'd all be this. And they're like, oh, and they're being real like a-holes about the whole situation. The Watchers are. And then Joe essentially demands Duncan demands he gets a jury trial, and then Joe's like, yeah, I want a jury trial. So then they call in like the heads of every region of the Watchers, like South American region, South African region, Europe region, America's region. Hey, sorry, I got my son. He's like trying to bust out of his car seat. I know, buddy. We're gonna get going in 1 sec. Anyway, so they have this trial, and then meanwhile, that the guy we saw before, we find out that he's an immortal, and he's pretending to be a Watcher, and so he accounts that guy who was watching him, and he's like, oh, yo, I'm one of you guys, check this out, and he shows him like the tattoo, and he's like, oh, good, who are you watching? And he's like, oh, I'm looking for this guy, and then the guy is like, who are you looking for? And the guy's like, I'm looking for, I can't remember his name, some guy, and he's like, that's funny, and he stabs the guy, and he's like, that's me, da-da! And so this guy's clearly out hunting Watchers for whatever reason. Anyway, during the trial, back to the trial, all of a sudden someone bursts in, or Mythos comes in and talks about how like there was like a Watcher who made friends with Mythos like 2,000 years ago, and how if they'd just been able to like record his history, could have learned so much about Mythos and everything, which is funny because Mythos is Mythos, right? It's trying to be like Adam Pearson or something. Anyway, but they're like, no one cares. And then like someone else bursts in later and is like, behold, the guy who was supposed to replace Joe to be Duncan's Watcher, he was killed. And they're like, you're guilty, Joe. And Joe's like, I've been here the whole time. And honestly, Duncan has too. And Duncan's like, how could I possibly have done that? And they're like, guilty. And it's like, so at some point, Duncan's like, the oath breaker, Duncan, I should say, and that's relevant because he again breaks his oath. They're like, we'll give him a jury trial, but if he gets executed, you get executed. And Duncan's like, that's fair. And then immediately after being told he's gonna be executed, Duncan like beats up some guys, he like Solid Snake style, and is like, all right, Joe, let's go. And Joe's like, no, I'm gonna keep my oath, and like if I gotta die, I gotta die. It is what it is. And Duncan's like, they go back and forth, and Duncan like stomps out of there like a spoiled child, breaking his oath again for like the 4th time in this season. Jeez. Anyway, he meets up with Mythos, and they're like complaining to him and being all sad eponymous. Anyway, the next day arrives, and Joe's out there, and he's like, I don't want that a-hole over there to shoot me. If you're gonna do this, you do this, because you're my friend, Jake. And Jake's like, I can't do it. And he like wanders back into like the house so he doesn't have to watch. And then the guy goes up to like execute him, like shooting him in the back of the head. And he's like, get on your knees. And Joe's like, go fuck yourself. And like crosses himself because he's clearly Catholic. And then we see the immortal guy who killed the other Watcher. He rolls up with like a assault rifle, and he's like bang, 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 and kills everybody, like all the heads of the regions and Joe and everything. And then Duncan like rolls up for whatever reason to like, I don't know, argue the point or just to see the dead body or whatever. And then he gets like a weird feeling because like there's a dead guard and everything. And then the immortal guy like rolls out of there on his bike. And I don't think Duncan had like a premonition, so I don't know if this guy's immortal. I thought he was, but maybe he's just like some a-hole guy. Anyway. So then Duncan runs in and sees everybody dead. He goes to hold Joe, and he's like, no! And then we get to be continued. So, hey, Joe survived somehow. Duncan got him up, took him to this wine cellar, and Mythos has been tending to him. I guess Mythos was a doctor back in, like, the ancient Greeks, like in, like, 2000 AD or BC or some crazy nonsense. Anyway, they've been hanging out. Joe's recovering, is sassy as usual. And, the Immortals, or sorry, the Watchers are after Duncan MacLeod. They think he killed everybody. For some reason, they still have no evidence that any of this happened, and they're still being assholes about the whole situation. We get a shot of some of these Watchers trying to track Duncan MacLeod to like shoot him up and kill him because they think he killed all these guys, which is not even close to be true. And then the Immortal from before, he ends up killing a bunch of those guys, and one of those guys ends up being Jack Shapiro, his son. So now he wants blood super bad. Right, so Duncan goes to kind of like see what's going on and see if he can track like the real killer or whatever. And then he Metal Gear Solids into like the compound where Shapiro's at, and then he looks up and he's got a gun, and then he sees a guy with a gun, and it's Jacob. Jacob's the Immortal that's been doing all this stuff. And then we have a recall. So Jacob is a guy, I think in the 1800s, who was a gypsy. I mean, he's always a gypsy, I guess. That's like his thing. He's like a gypsy. And Duncan was like hanging out with him, being a gypsy, and then he was married to Irina. Irina's another immortal. So yeah, we had another like immortal relationship that lasted like many years. So they've been like together for like 65 years before Jacob finally convinced her that they should get married. And so they got married. Yay, hooray. So when's Duncan get married? I don't know. Anyway, so Irina goes to like fetch water or something, and then this guy like convinces her to go help him with something, and then he like rapes her. And so then Jacob and Duncan figure this out, and they run over and like beat up the guy real good and almost kill him. And then they get like kicked out of the community because they're gypsies and they can't be trusted or whatever, and Irina's a liar. And so the guy like so Jacob stabs the guy who raped his wife, which good for him. And then Duncan gets like upset about it, and I'm like, bro, what has happened to you? Anyway, so they hang Jacob, but then Duncan comes back. He's immortal, so he comes back and cuts him down and drags him off later, and then he wakes up and they have to leave. And then so Jacob, once Duncan and him see each other, Duncan like goes and he gets like hit in the back of the head and almost get his head cut off by a Watcher guy with a big like crazy looking butcher knife looking thing. And then Jacob saves him, and they end up at Jacob's like, he's still being a gypsy, but now he's in the back of like a semi truck in like, I don't know, some weird place in Paris. And so they chit-chat about what happened, and then we find out that he was trying to kill the Watchers because he found out about him because dun-dun-dun. Horton, back in like 92, which again, it's 2025 now, or 26, whenever you're watching this. But this season came out in like 96, so it's like right around like the early Horton stuff from like he wasn't really around in season 1, but when he popped up in like season 2. Was he? He might have been at the end of season 1. I think he was mostly in season 2. Anyway, so Horton like used his assholery to like burn down Irina and Jacob's house and then chase him in the woods and then kill Irina, but then Jacob was able to get away because of the quickening stuff. And he's been hunting and then he like searched and tortured people and finally figured out what the Watchers are, and he's been on like a vendetta to like kill all of them. And then Duncan and him go back and forth about not all Watchers, right? That kind of stuff. And he's like, yes, all Watchers. And so then, he's like, well, meet my friend. He's a Watcher, something. So he goes to talk, and then so Duncan goes to talk to Joe, and Joe's like, no, I won't have any part of this. And he like storms off, and then Mythos is like all confused and upset because he's like a Watcher and an Immortal, and like he's feeling like he's betraying himself, and he doesn't know who he is anymore, and a lot of nonsense like that. Anyway, so they all go back and forth, and then then Joe and Mythos go to talk to like Shapiro about what's going on, and then he's pretty much says like, it's not Duncan, it's this Jacob guy, and like I'm gonna talk to him, and then we can kind of like end this and stop the bloodshed and all that stuff. And Shapiro's like, that sounds fine. And then it's not fine because Joe like gets Joe gets Jacob to like come out of his hidey hole, and they like are chit chatting about like what's going on, and they're trying to make peace. And then like one of Shapiro's men like shows up and shoots him, and then they start arguing. Goodness gracious! And Mythos is like not around. He's like really upset about the whole situation and what's going on, and they're gonna like this guy's gonna kill Jacob, and then Duncan shows up, and they're yelling at each other, and then there's like yada yelling, and like someone shoots Duncan, and then the guy goes and like kills Jacob, and Duncan's like, you better kill me too, you motherfucker, because I'm gonna come get you. But then he goes off, and then him and Mythos get into like a huge It's a lot of arguing in this episode, not gonna lie, and people trying to make peace, and then like no, blood for blood, and so a lot of that goes back and forth and around, and Duncan plays Metal Gear Solid a few times in this episode, and finally we get to like a final scene where Joe is like arguing with Shapiro about like the rightness of their whole cause and whatnot. And Mythos gets like tired of the whole thing, and he wanders off. And anyway, sorry, I already said that. So Joe and Shapiro are like arguing, and Shapiro's like going to do a jihad against the Immortals or something. And if he does, then like the Immortals are going to like do whatever, and they're yelling at each other about that. And then Duncan and he's like, we'll beat the Immortals, so we'll make a bit of everything about them. And then Duncan, you hear some like someone getting beat up like Metal Gear Solid style. And then Duncan like rolls on in with a gun. He's like, hey motherfucker, time to die. And Joe's like, no. And then he pulls a gun, and then they're like yelling at each other. And then Shapiro's like on his knees, like begging for his life, like peeing his pants and stuff. And Duncan finally like gets him to like climb into like a coffin. And then he like slams at it, and he's like, this ends here. And then he like storms off, and Joe's like, we good? And Duncan's like, get the, like no, we're not good. And so a bit later we see Duncan like wandering back to like his barge, and Joe's standing there. He's like, hey buddy. And Duncan's like, what do you want? And he's like, I'm looking for Mythos, I haven't seen him. And it's like, where do you think Mythos is? Mythos is done with this whole shit, man. Like he helped you because it was like to like get peace, and then like the guy you helped him, like you killed like an immortal, and he's an immortal, and like yeah, we're not all friends, but like there's like, you know, it's like the whole thing where it's like two brothers will like fight all the time, and then like someone like calls one of the brothers like an asshole, and both brothers are like, time to die, and they team up. Like it's that's like the Immortals. And so then Joe's like, oh man, let me go buy you a drink and we'll hang out. And Duncan's like, no. And then Joe's like, maybe another time. And Duncan doesn't respond. And he's like, oh, which is kind of a funny way to end the season, because that's the end of the episode. And then it's season 4, which was a mixed bag. It started off like real strong for like the first half. Then the French arc has been like very up and down. Like there's been some cool episodes. This finale is kind of like, it's interesting. I'm not against it too so much. Like, and just the base like a more Highlander episode, these two episodes are pretty decent. I mean, the previous episode was pretty much like half of it was just like flashbacks, which is kind of like meh. It's kind of lazy, but this episode was kind of good. It ended kind of like funny. Like Joe was like very chipper about the whole situation. I'm like, hey buddy, and Duncan's like, no. Like I absolutely not. We're not gonna act like we're super buddies right now. So it's like the second time in their like tumultuous relationship throughout these seasons that they've had like a little bit of like a hard time together. But yeah, it was fun. 2 more seasons to go, so join me again in a couple weeks for season 5, which I think is less episodes. The video should be slightly shorter. I think it's only 20. And then season 16, I think, is 18. So anyway, cool. So go ahead, like, share, subscribe, comment, and I will catch you guys later. Bye.